October 1876, Dakota Territory. The last train before winter whistled mournfully as it approached the rough-hewn platform of Deadwood Creek. Black smoke billowed against the leaden sky, carrying the promise of an early snow. The locomotive's rhythm slowed, but before it could come to a complete stop, a dozen men swarmed onto the tracks, forcing the engineer to jam the brakes with a screech of metal that set teeth on edge. "Get off the damn tracks," the conductor shouted, swinging down from his car. The men miners, by the look of their mud-caked boots and weather-beaten faces, ignored him. Their attention was fixed on a thin, nervous-looking fellow they dragged from the nearby saloon. Blood trickled from his split lip into his patchy beard. "Thieving bastard took my dust," growled the largest of the miners, a mountain of a man with a russet beard and scarred knuckles. "2 months' worth." The accused man's eyes darted frantically between the faces surrounding him. "I swear on my mother's grave, Buchanan, it wasn't me. I was playing cards all night. Ask anyone." Inside the third passenger car, Margaret Maggie Callahan watched through the window, her gloved hand sliding instinctively to the small Remington revolver concealed in the folds of her gray traveling dress. At 30, she'd seen enough violence during the war to recognize its approach, the tightening circle of men, the hungry anticipation in their eyes. Her fingers traced the cool metal beneath the fabric, a habit formed in field hospitals, where drug soldiers sometimes woke in violent confusion. "Judge Thornton ain't due till spring," someone in the mob called out. "I say we handle this now." The accused man fell to his knees. "Please, I got a family back east." Maggie's jaw tightened. 3 years as a Union Army nurse had taught her the precise weight of human desperation. This man wasn't lying. She glanced around the car, but her fellow passengers seemed content to watch the spectacle unfold, a welcome diversion after days of monotonous travel. A mother clutched her daughter closer, whispering something about savages. An elderly gentleman across the aisle muttered frontier justice. But Maggie saw only a man about to die without trial in a place where life seemed to hold less value than the gold these men pulled from the earth. "Hang him from the water tower," someone suggested, and a murmur of approval rippled through the crowd. Before she could reconsider, Maggie was on her feet, moving toward the door. The conductor blocked her path. "Ma'am, I must insist you remain aboard. This isn't a matter for a woman," Maggie finished, her blue eyes hard as river ice. "I've stitched together men who'd been torn apart by canisters shot at Antietam. I think I can handle a few miners." She pushed past him and stepped onto the platform, her boots crunching on the frost-hardened ground. The cold air hit her like a physical blow after the stuffy warmth of the train car. She took a steadying breath, drawing herself up to her full height, unimpressive by most standards, but made formidable by the rigid set of her spine, a posture learned in hospital tents, where authority often meant the difference between order and chaos. "Gentlemen," she called out, her voice carrying with surprising strength, "I suggest you think carefully before you hang a man without proof." The crowd turned, momentarily startled by the interruption. The big miner Buchanan squinted at her through the swirling coal smoke. "This ain't your business, lady." "I'm making it my business." Maggie descended the last step. "I'm a nurse. I know the look of a guilty man. I've seen it in soldiers who stole morphine. I've seen it in deserters caught at the Maryland line." She gestured toward the trembling accused. "That's not what I see here." Buchanan spat a stream of tobacco juice onto the tracks. "And who exactly are you, partner?" "Margaret Callahan. I served with the 5th Massachusetts Volunteer Infantry Medical Division." She reached into her satchel, producing a folded piece of paper. "And I believe the man you want is still on that train." It was a calculated risk. The letter in her hand was actually from Thomas Reed, the man who'd promised to help her find her missing brother in exchange for her hand in marriage. But Maggie had spent enough time in army camps to know that confidence often carried more weight than truth. "What are you saying, woman?" demanded a wiry miner with a patchy beard. "A man boarded at the last stop. He was nervous, kept checking his coat pocket." Maggie nodded toward the last passenger car. "Heavy pocket for someone who claimed to be a reverend." The accusation hung in the air for one heart-stopping moment. Then, as if responding to a silent command, half the men surged toward the train. Buchanan hesitated, eyes narrowing as he studied Maggie. "If you're wrong." "I'm not." She met his gaze steadily, though her heart hammered against her ribs. Minutes later, a commotion erupted from the rear car. A well-dressed man was dragged onto the platform, protesting loudly until someone reached into his coat and extracted a leather pouch. Buchanan untied it, his weathered face breaking into a vindicated grin as gold dust spilled into his palm. Well, I'll be damned. The originally accused man sagged in relief, stammering thanks as his captors released him. The real thief was promptly marched toward the sheriff's office, or what passed for one in this rough settlement. The conductor rang the bell, signaling departure. As Maggie turned to reboard, Buchanan called out, "You got a place to stay in Deadwood. Mrs. Callahan." "It's Miss," she corrected automatically. "And I'm looking for a man named Thomas Reed. I was told he lives near here." A peculiar silence fell. The miners exchanged glances that set alarm bells ringing in Maggie's mind. "Reed don't live in Deadwood proper," Buchanan finally said. "He works for Marshal Coleman over in the hills. But ma'am," he hesitated, choosing his words, "Deadwood ain't no place for a woman alone these days, especially with winter coming. There's been trouble since Little Bighorn." "I'm not afraid of Indians," Maggie said. Buchanan's laugh held no humor. "It ain't just Indians you need to worry about." The train whistle blew again, more insistently. "There's a settlement called Dry Creek about 10 miles southeast," offered a grizzled old-timer. "Quieter folk, families. Reed comes through there sometimes. Station master can arrange a wagon if you're set on going." Maggie nodded her thanks and reboarded. As the train pulled away, she noticed a figure watching from the shadow of the water tower. A tall man with the unmistakable bearing of a military officer, though he wore civilian clothes. Their eyes met briefly and something cold coiled in her stomach. The man's gaze held the calculating assessment of a predator. The train delivered her to Dry Creek shortly before dusk, little more than a whistle stop with a handful of buildings clustered around a crossroads. The station master, a rheumy-eyed old man with a perpetual sniff, arranged for a wagon to take her the remaining distance. "You'll want to reach Cain's Creek 'fore dark," he warned, eyeing the gathering clouds. "Got the feel of snow coming." As the wagon rattled along the rutted trail, Maggie's thoughts drifted to her brother. Daniel had been just 17 when he joined the Union Army, too young and too eager. When he returned, something essential had been carved out of him, replaced with a restlessness that eventually drove him west. His last letter had come from the Black Hills 6 months ago, full of cryptic references to striking it rich and warnings to trust no one in uniform. She'd written back immediately but received no reply. 3 weeks ago, the letter from Thomas Reed had arrived, claiming to be a friend of Daniel's who knew his whereabouts. His proposal of marriage had seemed secondary to the promise of news about her brother. The wagon driver, a taciturn man named Fletcher, broke her reverie. "Storm's moving faster than I thought." He pointed to dark clouds massing over the hills. "Gonna be close." They had entered a narrow valley, the trail following a half-frozen creek. Pine forest climbed the steep slopes on either side, broken occasionally by rocky outcroppings. The temperature was dropping rapidly, and the first snowflakes began to swirl around them. "How much further?" Maggie asked, drawing her woolen cloak tighter. "Mile, maybe less. Just round that bend." Fletcher never finished the sentence. The crack of a rifle shot echoed through the valley, and Fletcher pitched sideways, blood blooming across his chest. The horses reared in panic as 2 masked riders emerged from the trees, rifles raised. "Hand over the strongbox," one shouted. Maggie reached for her revolver, but the wagon lurched violently as the frightened horses bolted. She was thrown against the side, then backwards. Her head struck something hard, and darkness swept over her. She woke to cold, a bone-deep cold that seemed to have replaced her blood with ice water. She was being carried, her body limp as a rag doll against someone's chest. Through half-closed eyes, she glimpsed a snow-covered path and the dark outline of a cabin ahead. Consciousness slipped away again. The next time she opened her eyes, she lay on a narrow bed beneath a pile of quilts. A fire crackled in a stone hearth, casting dancing shadows across rough-hewn walls. Her head throbbed fiercely, and when she tried to sit up, the room spun. "You shouldn't move yet." The voice was small, childlike. Maggie turned her head carefully and found herself looking into a pair of solemn brown eyes. A little girl of perhaps 6 years stood beside the bed, clutching a cloth doll with button eyes and yarn hair. Her own hair was the color of wheat, braided neatly on each side of a heart-shaped face. "Where am I?" Maggie's voice emerged as a croak. "Papa's house," the child replied, as if that explained everything. She tilted her head, studying Maggie with uncomfortable intensity. "You look just like her, the lady in the picture." "What picture, sweetheart?" Instead of answering, the girl reached out with hesitant fingers to touch Maggie's hair. "Are you Aunt Sarah? You must be. You have the same eyes." A smile bloomed across her face. "I knew you'd come someday. Papa said you were lost, but I told him you'd find us." Before Maggie could correct the misunderstanding, heavy footsteps sounded on the porch. The door swung open, bringing a gust of cold air and a swirl of snowflakes. The man who entered filled the door frame, broad-shouldered and tall, with the lean hardness of someone accustomed to physical labor. His dark beard was flecked with snow, as was the fur collar of his coat. But it was his eyes that caught and held Maggie's attention, gray as gunmetal wall and just as hard. "Papa," the little girl exclaimed, "look who's here. It's Aunt Sarah, just like in the picture." The man went completely still, his expression shifting from surprise to suspicion to something darker. "Ellie, go check on the soup," he said, his voice gentle, despite the storm gathering in his eyes. The child Ellie hesitated, looking between them. "But Papa—" "Now please." With obvious reluctance, Ellie retreated to the far side of the single room, where a pot bubbled on a cast-iron stove. The man crossed to the bed in 3 long strides, looming over Maggie. Up close, she could see the scar that bisected his right eyebrow and the lines etched around his mouth, a face weathered by more than just the elements. "Who are you?" he demanded softly, mindful of his daughter's presence. "Margaret Callahan," Maggie answered, meeting his gaze despite the disadvantage of her position. "I was on my way to find a man named Thomas Reed when the wagon was attacked. The driver was shot." "Fletcher's dead," the man confirmed. "Found him about a half-mile back. You're lucky I came along when I did. Storm would have had you before morning." He studied her with naked suspicion. "What business you have with Reed?" There was something in the way he spoke the name, a subtle hardening of his jaw that made Maggie cautious. "He wrote to me about my brother Daniel. Said he knew where to find him." "Daniel," the man repeated. His expression revealed nothing, but Maggie had spent too many years reading the micro-expressions of wounded soldiers not to notice the almost imperceptible flicker of recognition. "You know him," she said. It wasn't a question. The man turned away, removing his heavy coat and hanging it by the door. "I know a lot of men." "Papa," Ellie called, "the soup's ready." "Thank you, darling." His tone softened when addressing his daughter. To Maggie, he said, "You can call me Kane, Jonah Kane. This is my land you're on." "I'm grateful for your help, Mr. Kane, but as soon as the storm passes—" "Storm won't pass for days," Kane interrupted, moving to the window. Outside, snow was falling in earnest now, thick flakes whipped into frenzy by the wind. "First blizzard of the season. Early this year." He turned back to her, his expression unreadable. "Looks like you'll be staying a while, Miss Callahan." Ellie approached with a steaming bowl. "I put in extra carrots," she announced proudly. "Aunt Sarah needs to get strong again." Kane's jaw tightened. "Ellie, Miss Callahan isn't your Aunt Sarah." The little girl's face fell. "But she looks just like her." "It's a coincidence. Now take this to her and then wash up for your own supper." As Ellie carefully placed the bowl on a small table beside the bed, Maggie caught the child's whispered words, "I knew you'd come. I saw you in my dream." Later, when Ellie was asleep in a curtained alcove, Maggie managed to make her way to the main room despite her throbbing head. Kane sat at a rough-hewn table cleaning a rifle by the light of a kerosene lamp. Her own belongings, the carpet bag and her cloak, had been placed on a bench near the door, but her revolver was notably absent. "Looking for this?" Kane asked without looking up. He nodded toward the Remington, which lay on the table within his reach. "Yes," Maggie said simply. "Not many women carry a gun like this." He continued his methodical cleaning of the rifle. "Where'd you learn to shoot?" "My husband taught me before he went to war." She moved closer to the fire, drawn by its warmth. "He didn't come back the same. Shot himself 6 months after returning home." Kane's hand stilled momentarily. "Confederate or Union?" "Union. Captain William Callahan, 5th Massachusetts." Something flickered across Kane's face, a shadow of old pain quickly suppressed. "I was at Sharpsburg," he said after a pause. "Antietam Creek, you all called it." The revelation settled between them like a physical presence. Antietam had been one of the bloodiest days of the war, over 20,000 casualties in a single day of fighting. "You were Confederate," Maggie said quietly. Kane nodded once, returning to his task. "Captain 12th Virginia Infantry." The silence stretched, filled with unspoken history. Maggie had spent the war trying to save men from both sides. Kane had spent it trying to kill her countrymen. Yet here they were, thrown together by circumstance in this remote cabin while winter raged outside. "Your daughter," Maggie finally said. "She mentioned someone named Sarah." Kane set down the cleaning rod, his movements deliberate. "My late wife's sister. She was supposed to come help with Ellie after Demary died in childbirth. Train was attacked by raiders 3 years back." His voice remained steady, but his knuckles whitened around the rifle. "No survivors." "I'm sorry," Maggie said, meaning it. "Why are you really here, Miss Callahan?" Kane asked abruptly. "Black Hills ain't a place women come without good reason." Maggie considered her options. This man clearly knew something about her brother, but his hostility toward Thomas Reed suggested complicated allegiances. She decided on a portion of the truth. "My brother Daniel came west after the war. He wrote about striking gold, then his letters stopped. Reed wrote saying he knew where Daniel was, but he'd only tell me in person." She met Kane's gaze directly. "The marriage proposal seems secondary to finding my brother." "Marriage proposal," Kane repeated, a muscle working in his jaw. "Reed proposed without meeting you. It happens out here, doesn't it?" Maggie gestured vaguely toward the window. "Men outnumber women 20 to 1. Kane's laugh was harsh. "Reed isn't looking for a wife, Miss Callahan. He's looking for leverage." "Leverage? Against your brother." Kane rose, moving to a cupboard where he retrieved a bottle of whiskey and 2 tin cups. He poured a measure into each and offered one to Maggie. "Daniel found something valuable, something Reed's employer wants badly." Maggie accepted the cup but didn't drink. "You do know him." "Knew him," Kane corrected. "Haven't seen him in months." "Is he alive?" Kane's hesitation was answer enough. "I don't know," he admitted. "But if Reed's involved, Daniel's in trouble." "And who is Reed's employer?" Maggie pressed. Kane took a long swallow of whiskey before answering. "Marshall Coleman owns most of the mining operations around Deadwood." His eyes held hers steadily. "Former Union lieutenant colonel. Man who ran the prisoner camp where I spent the last year of the war." Understanding dawned like a cold sunrise. "There's history there." "You could say that." Kane set down his cup with careful precision. "Coleman executed prisoners for sport. Called it reducing the Confederate population. I was one of 12 who survived out of 200. Maggie's nurse training kept her expression neutral, but inwardly she recoiled. She'd heard whispered stories of atrocities on both sides, things never reported in newspapers. "After the war," Kane continued, "I came west to start over. Built this place with my own hands. Then Mary died and I was raising Ellie alone when Coleman showed up in Deadwood buying claims and bringing civilization." The last word dripped with contempt. "He recognized me. I saw it in his eyes at the general store. Next day, Reed came offering to buy my land." Kane's smile was grim. "I declined." "What does any of this have to do with my brother?" Maggie asked. Kane seemed to debate with himself before crossing to the fireplace. He knelt, prying up a loose hearthstone to reveal a small cavity beneath. From it, he extracted an oilskin packet. "Daniel left this with me for safekeeping." He unfolded the oilskin on the table, revealing a piece of paper that appeared to be half of a larger map, torn jaggedly down the middle. "Gold?" Maggie asked, studying the crude markings. Kane nodded. "Biggest deposit anyone's seen since California. But it's on disputed land territory promised to the Sioux in the Treaty of '68. The same treaty the government broke when they allowed miners into the Black Hills," Maggie noted. Kane's eyebrow lifted slightly, acknowledging her awareness of the politics. "Daniel found it while scouting for Coleman, but he had a conscience. Knew what would happen if word got out: more broken treaties, more bloodshed." He carefully refolded the map. "So he split it, gave me half, kept half himself, insurance. And now Coleman wants both pieces," Maggie concluded, "and he'll use anyone to get them, including your brother's sister." Kane's eyes were hard again. "That's why Reed wrote to you. They couldn't find Daniel, so they're using you as bait." The realization struck Maggie like a physical blow. She'd walked willingly into a trap carried by hope and the desperate need to find her last living relative. "If Daniel still has his half of the map, he's in danger," Kane continued. "If he doesn't," he let the implication hang in the air between them. Outside, the wind howled, driving snow against the cabin walls with increased fury. The blizzard had sealed them in, at least for now. Maggie stared into the flames, mind racing. She'd come west to find her brother only to discover she might be the instrument of his undoing. "What would Reed have done if I'd arrived as expected?" she asked finally. "Brought you straight to Coleman," Kane replied without hesitation. "Used you to force Daniel's hand if he's still alive. And if not, then you become their next best option for finding the map." He glanced meaningfully at her revolver. "I assume you know how to use that." "Yes." Maggie's voice was steady despite the chill that ran through her. "But I'm a better shot with a rifle." A ghost of a smile touched Kane's lips. "Good, because when this storm breaks, we're both in the crosshairs." He returned the map to its hiding place and stood. "Get some rest, Miss Callahan. Storm like this could last days." As he turned toward his own sleeping area, a pallet near the hearth, Maggie asked the question that had been nagging at her. "Why help me? We were enemies once." Kane paused, firelight casting his profile in stark relief. "War's been over 11 years. I've buried enough people." He looked toward the alcove where his daughter slept. "Besides, Ellie likes you. Says you were in her dream." He said it dismissively, but something in his tone made Maggie wonder if he half believed it himself. Later, as she lay listening to the storm rage outside, Maggie's hand strayed to the small locket hidden in her bodice, the one containing a faded photograph of Daniel in his Union uniform, young and proud and unbroken by war. She'd crossed half a continent to find him. Now she might be the very thing that sealed his fate. In the darkness of the cabin, with a Confederate captain sleeping across the room and a blizzard sealing them from the world, Maggie made a silent promise to her absent brother. She would find him, and anyone who stood in her way, Union or Confederate past or present, would learn what the field nurses of Antietam were truly made of. The floor creaked as Kane shifted in his sleep, his face troubled even in repose. Tomorrow they would be uneasy allies against a common enemy. But tonight, separated by the dying fire and years of bloodshed, they were still strangers bound only by circumstance and a little girl's dream. Outside, beneath the howling wind and swirling snow, the sound went unnoticed, horses approaching, then stopping at a distance. Dark figures dismounting, studying the cabin's chimney smoke against the night sky. Waiting. The blizzard raged for 3 days, trapping them in the small cabin with only each other's company and dwindling supplies. By the second day, Maggie had taken over meal preparation, stretching their stores with skills learned during wartime shortages. She kept her distance from Kane, who spent hours at the window watching the snow with the intensity of a man who expected enemies to materialize from the white void. Ellie, however, proved impossible to avoid. The child followed Maggie everywhere, peppering her with questions about the big city and helping with chores as if they'd been family for years. "Did you bring me anything?" Ellie asked on the morning of the third day, watching Maggie braid her hair. "I didn't know I'd be meeting you," Maggie reminded her gently. The girl's face fell. "But in my dream you brought a silver comb with birds on it." Maggie's hand stilled. "What else did you dream about me?" Ellie's expression turned solemn. "That you were sick and looking for someone, and that the bad men were following you." She lowered her voice to a whisper. "The same ones who want to take Papa's land." From across the room, Kane spoke without turning from the window. "Ellie, enough. Let Miss Callahan be." "It's all right," Maggie said. "She's just curious." To Ellie, she added, "Why don't you show me your doll?" As the girl scampered off to retrieve her toy, Maggie approached Kane. "She's very observant." "Too much so," he agreed, his breath fogging the glass. "Mary was the same way. Saw things others missed." He glanced at Maggie. "Storm's easing. We'll have visitors soon." "How do you know?" Kane gestured toward the distant tree line. "Smoke. Too thin to be from a proper campfire." "Someone's keeping watch, staying just warm enough not to freeze." His jaw tightened. "Coleman's men." "They followed me." Maggie realized a cold weight settling in her stomach. "Most likely, or they've been watching the cabin all along." Kane moved away from the window, retrieving his rifle from its place above the door. "Either way, we need to be ready to move when the snow stops." "Move where?" Maggie asked. "You said yourself they're watching." "Not the main trail." Kane knelt beside the hearth using a poker to shift the logs. "There's an old mine shaft about a half-mile east connects to tunnels the Sioux used before the miners came. We can use it to reach Dry Creek without being seen." "And then what? We can't hide forever." Maggie lowered her voice, glancing at Ellie, who was busy showing her doll the proper way to stir imaginary soup. I need to find Daniel. Kane's expression hardened. First, we need to stay alive. He handed her the rifle. You know how to use one of these? Better than that revolver, she confirmed, checking the action with practiced ease. But I'm hoping it won't come to shooting. A humorless smile touched Kane's lips. In my experience, Miss Callahan, it usually does. By late afternoon, the snow had stopped, though the sky remained heavy with the promise of more to come. Kane watched through the window as shadows lengthened across the pristine white blanket covering the yard. We'll leave at dusk, he decided. Less chance of being spotted. They prepared in tense silence. Kane filled a knapsack with food and essentials, while Maggie helped Ellie into extra layers of clothing. The child seemed to sense the gravity of the situation, asking no questions, as Maggie wrapped a woolen scarf around her small face until only her serious brown eyes were visible. Remember what I told you, Kane said, kneeling before his daughter. Stay between Miss Callahan and me. No talking until we're safe. Ellie nodded solemnly. Just as the last light faded from the western sky, they slipped out the back door. The cold hit Maggie like a physical blow, stealing her breath. Snow crunched beneath their boots as Kane led them toward a dense stand of pines. The world had been transformed into a crystalline landscape, beautiful and deadly in equal measure. They had covered perhaps 100 yards when the first shot rang out. Kane reacted instantly, shoving Ellie toward Maggie and raising his rifle in one fluid motion. A second shot splintered bark from a tree inches from his head. Run! He shouted, firing toward the tree line. The mine entrance, straight through those rocks! Maggie scooped Ellie into her arms and ran her nurse's training, overriding fear with clear purpose. Protect the child. Behind her, she heard the crack of Kane's rifle and answering fire from at least two directions. The snow hampered her progress, each step sinking knee-deep, but adrenaline drove her forward. An outcropping of granite loomed ahead, half concealed by drifted snow. Maggie nearly missed the dark opening at its base, a ragged hole just large enough for a man to enter crouching. She set Ellie down beside it. Inside quickly, she urged, helping the girl crawl into the darkness. Your father's right behind us. As if summoned via her words, Kane appeared running in a crouch. Blood stained the sleeve of his coat, but his expression remained grimly focused. Get in, he ordered, dropping to one knee to cover their retreat. I'll hold them off. Not without you, Maggie insisted. She reached for his injured arm. You're hit. Grazed. Kane fired again and a cry of pain echoed across the snow. That won't hold them long. Go. Maggie hesitated only a moment before crawling into the mine entrance, rifle awkwardly thrust before her. Ellie huddled just inside, eyes wide with fear in the gloom. Kane backed in seconds later, dragging a fallen branch to partially conceal the opening. We need to keep moving, he said, his breath visible in the frigid air. They'll find the entrance soon enough. The old mine shaft was a nightmare of close darkness, the ceiling so low they were forced to move in a half-crouch. Kane produced a small lantern from his pack, its light revealing rough-hewn walls, supported by timbers that creaked ominously. The air was stale thick, with the smell of damp earth, and something more metallic, the lingering scent of minerals torn from the mountain's heart. Ellie walked between them, one small hand clutching Maggie's skirt, the other holding tight to her father's coat. She made no sound, but her grip tightened whenever the timbers groaned overhead. They had traveled perhaps a quarter mile when Kane paused, raising his hand for silence. In the stillness, Maggie heard a faint sound of pursuit voices echoing through the tunnel behind them. How many tunnels branch off this one? She whispered. Too many to count, Kane replied. Old-timers dug in every direction following seams. Problem is, half of them have collapsed. You know which ones haven't? A ghost of a smile crossed his face. Some. Daniel and I mapped a few when he first came to these hills. He glanced back the way they'd come, calculation in his eyes. There's a junction ahead. Leads to a vertical shaft and old air hole. Might be our best chance. They pressed on the sounds of pursuit, growing louder. The tunnel widened slightly, intersecting with other passages that branched like dark veins into the mountain. Kane led them confidently, though Maggie noted the tension in his shoulders. He was gambling with their lives, trusting memory and instinct in the subterranean maze. The vertical shaft appeared suddenly, a black circle in the floor ringed by rotting timbers. Kane knelt beside it, lowering the lantern. The light revealed iron rungs embedded in the wall, descending into darkness. It goes down about 30 feet, he explained quietly. Opens into a larger chamber, the Sioux used as a shelter. From there, another tunnel leads toward Dry Creek. You want us to climb down that? Maggie asked, eyeing the rusted rungs skeptically. Unless you'd prefer to face Coleman's men. Kane handed her the lantern. I'll go first. Hand Ellie down to me, then follow. Without waiting for her response, he lowered himself into the shaft. The darkness swallowed him until only his hands were visible gripping the edge. Then he was gone, the soft scrape of boots against iron, the only indication of his descent. Ellie looked up at Maggie, fear etched across her small face. I don't want to go down there, she whispered. Maggie knelt, setting the lantern aside to take the child's hands in hers. I know it's scary, sweetheart, but your papa's waiting for you and I'll be right behind. She brushed a strand of blonde hair from the girl's forehead. Sometimes we have to be brave, even when we're afraid. That's what real courage is. Like soldiers. Exactly like soldiers. Maggie managed a reassuring smile. Ready. After a moment's hesitation, Ellie nodded. Maggie guided her to the edge where Kane's voice floated up from the darkness. Send her down, Maggie. The use of her first name, unplanned and intimate in the darkness, steadied her. She helped Ellie onto the first rung, then watched anxiously as the child descended with painstaking care, small boots feeling for each iron step. Kane's voice rose again, relief evident. Got her, your turn. Maggie had just swung her legs over the edge when a shout echoed from the tunnel behind her. Lantern light bobbed in the distance. Their pursuers had found them. With no time for caution, she seized the lantern and began her descent, moving as quickly as she dared on the ancient rungs. She had nearly reached the bottom when the first shot rang out, the bullet striking the shaft wall in a shower of sparks. Kane's arm circled her waist, yanking her the rest of the way down as more shots followed. This way, he urged, pulling her into a low tunnel that branched from the chamber. Ellie was already ahead, crawling on hands and knees. They won't risk the shaft in the dark. The new tunnel was even narrower than the first, forcing them to crawl single file through sections where the ceiling dipped treacherously low. Maggie's skirts caught on jagged rocks, and her palms were soon raw from the rough stone. But fear drove her forward, keeping pace with Ellie's small form and Kane's broader silhouette ahead. After what seemed an eternity of darkness, Kane's whispered, "Here," brought them to another junction. This passage was taller, allowing them to stand though Maggie's shoulders still brushed the walls. Kane raised the lantern, revealing a small wooden door set into the stone, reinforced with iron bands. Sue's storage cache, he explained, working a rusted latch. Used it during winters when hunting was poor. The door creaked open, revealing a small chamber hollowed from living rock. We'll rest here. They won't find this place. Inside, the air was surprisingly fresh, circulating through some hidden chimney in the rock. Kane produced dried meat and a water skin from his pack, sharing them with quiet efficiency. Ellie curled against her father's side, exhaustion evident in every line of her small body. Within minutes, she was asleep. In the lantern's dim glow, Maggie studied Kane's face, the hard planes softened by fatigue, the watchful eyes that never fully relaxed. You're bleeding again, she noted, gesturing to his sleeve where fresh blood had seeped through the makeshift bandage. It's nothing. But he didn't resist when she moved closer to examine the wound. Bullet grazed the muscle. She assessed, peeling back the blood-stiffened fabric. Needs cleaning and proper bandaging or it'll fester. Kane watched in silence as she tore a strip from her petticoat and used water from the skin to clean the wound. Her movements were practiced, clinical, the same hands that had tended countless soldiers in field hospitals. You're good at that, he observed. I've had plenty of practice. She worked in concentration, fingers gentle despite their efficiency. Confederate and Union wounds bleed the same. A muscle ticked in Kane's jaw. Not all Union officers were like Coleman. No, she agreed, just as not all Confederates fought to preserve slavery. His eyes met hers, surprised by the understanding in her voice. You sound like you've given it some thought. War isn't as simple as the newspapers made it seem. Maggie secured the bandage with a neat knot. My husband enlisted believing he was fighting to free slaves. By the time he realized most politicians cared more about economic control than human dignity, it was too late to turn back. And your brother? Daniel was different, younger, more idealistic. A sad smile touched her lips. He never lost faith in the cause, even when the men leading it proved corrupt. Kane absorbed this in silence, his gaze drifting to his sleeping daughter. Mary's family disowned her for marrying me, said no daughter of theirs would wed a rebel. The bitterness in his voice was an old one worn smooth by years. Only Sarah kept in touch, wrote letters, sent presents for Ellie. That's why Ellie thinks I'm her, Maggie realized. The resemblance. Kane nodded. Sarah had dark hair, blue eyes. His gaze returned to Maggie studying her with quiet intensity. When Ellie first saw you, I almost believed it myself for a moment. The admission hung between them unexpectedly intimate in the close darkness. Maggie looked away, first uncomfortable with the strange connection forming between them, this Confederate captain, who should have been her enemy, yet felt increasingly like her only ally. How did you and Daniel become, she searched for the right word, associates? A humorless smile touched Kane's lips. Ironic, isn't it? He showed up about a year ago scouting for Coleman. Didn't know the connection at first. Kane shifted, careful not to disturb Ellie. He came to buy lumber for the mining operation. We got to talking, found out we'd been at some of the same battles on opposite sides. And that created a bond. No, that came later. Kane's voice lowered. Coleman's operation was pushing into Sioux territory, breaking the treaty. Miners were disappearing, blamed on Indian attacks, but Daniel suspected otherwise. He started asking questions, found records that didn't match the official reports. What kind of records? Production logs, more gold coming out than could be accounted for from the registered claims. Kane's eyes hardened. Coleman was mining on Sioux land secretly, then laundering the gold through legitimate operations. When the Sioux objected, his men staged Indian attacks as cover to eliminate witnesses. Maggie felt sick. And Daniel discovered this? Kane nodded. By then, he'd also found the motherlode, a vein richer than anything in the hills, right on the border of the treaty lands. He came to me because he knew my history with Coleman, knew I'd have reason to help stop him. So you split the map, Maggie concluded. Insurance. Daniel's idea said if anything happened to him, I should find you. Kane's gaze was steady. Said you were the only person he trusted completely. The words pierced Maggie with unexpected force. She had crossed half a continent based on a stranger's letter. But her brother had trusted her all along, planning for her involvement before she even knew he was in danger. When did you last see him? She asked, her voice barely above a whisper. 2 months ago. He was heading to Fort Laramie to find a federal marshal, someone outside Coleman's influence. Kane's expression darkened. Never made it. Week later, Reed and his men came offering to buy my land. When I refused it, accidents started happening. Fences cut, livestock spooked, warning shots in the night. And now they've escalated to direct attacks, Maggie said. Because of you, Kane confirmed. They must think Daniel talked before disappearing. Think you know where his half of the map is hidden. The revelation settled over them like a physical weight. Outside their stone sanctuary, danger waited men who wouldn't hesitate to kill for gold, who had possibly already killed her brother. How long can we stay here? Maggie asked, reality reasserting itself. Few hours. We'll move before dawn. Kane checked his rifle, a mechanical gesture that spoke of years of military habit. Tunnel comes out near Widow Simmons's place on the edge of Dry Creek. She's no friend of Coleman's, lost her husband in one of those Indian attacks. Then what? Maggie pressed. Coleman won't stop looking. Kane's eyes met hers, hard with resolve. Then we find your brother. Or we make Coleman pay for what he's done to him. The conviction in his voice should have frightened her. Instead, Maggie found herself nodding, a similar resolve hardening in her chest. She had come west seeking family and found a war instead, one as personal and brutal as the conflict that had nearly destroyed the nation. Get some rest, Kane advised, settling back against the wall. I'll take first watch. Maggie arranged herself on the opposite side of the small chamber, using her cloak as a makeshift blanket. The stone floor was unforgiving, but she had slept in worse conditions during the war. Still, sleep eluded her, her mind racing with all she'd learned. Kane, she said softly, mindful of Ellie's even breathing between them. If Daniel is, she couldn't complete the thought. We'll cross that bridge when we come to it, he replied, understanding her unspoken fear. Daniel Callahan struck me as a man who's hard to kill. The simple statement offered more comfort than platitudes would have. Maggie closed her eyes, allowing exhaustion to finally claim her. She woke to Kane's hand on her shoulder, his voice low with urgency. Time to move. The lantern had been extinguished, leaving them in complete darkness. Ellie stirred sleepily as Kane gathered their meager supplies. "How will we see?" Maggie whispered. "Don't need to. Tunnel only goes one way from here." Kane's voice came from inches away, startlingly close in the blackness. "Stay close. Follow the wall with your hand." They proceeded in darkness, a strange procession of shadows moving through deeper shadow. Ellie walked between them again, one hand in her father's, the other clutching Maggie's skirt. The only sounds were their breathing and the scuff of boots against stone. Gradually, Maggie became aware of a change in the air, a freshness that hinted at the world above. The tunnel began to slope upward, and faint gray light filtered through cracks in what appeared to be wooden planks ahead. Kane halted them with a raised hand. "Cellar door," he whispered. "Leads to Widow Simmons's storage room. I'll go first to make sure it's safe." He moved forward alone, testing the wooden boards that concealed the tunnel entrance. They gave way with a soft creak, revealing a rectangle of dim light. Kane pulled himself up and disappeared from view. Long moments passed, each second stretching Maggie's nerves tighter. Finally, his face reappeared in the opening. "All clear. Hand Ellie up." The transition from underground darkness to the relative brightness of a root cellar left Maggie momentarily blinded. As her eyes adjusted, she made out rough shelves lined with preserves and a narrow staircase leading upward. Kane was already replacing the boards over the tunnel entrance, concealing it beneath what appeared to be a stack of empty barrels. "Widow Simmons is expecting us," he explained, dusting his hands. "Daniel arranged this escape route months ago. She keeps it ready." "Smart man, your brother," came a new voice from the stairs. Maggie turned to see a woman descending tall and rail-thin, with iron gray hair pulled back in a severe bun. Despite her advanced age, she moved with the purposeful energy of someone half her years. Sharp eyes surveyed them from a face weathered by sun and hardship. "Jonah Kane," the woman acknowledged with a nod. "Been wondering when you'd use that bolt hole." Her gaze shifted to Maggie, assessing. "This the sister Daniel spoke of." "Margaret Callahan," Maggie confirmed, extending her hand. "Thank you for your hospitality, Mrs. Simmons." The widow's handshake was firm, calloused from years of labor. "Call me Martha, and save your thanks. Anyone Coleman's hunting deserves shelter in my book." She knelt to Ellie's level. "Hello, little one. Bet you're hungry after all that crawling around underground." Ellie nodded shyly. "Got flapjacks keeping warm on the stove. Come on up, all of you, but stay away from the windows. Coleman's men have been through town twice since yesterday." Martha's kitchen was warm and smelled of coffee and wood smoke, a stark contrast to the cold darkness they'd left behind. As promised, a stack of flapjacks waited on the stove along with a pot of beans and salt pork. While Ellie ate hungrily, the adults gathered at the far end of the table, speaking in low voices. 4 riders came through at sunset, Martha reported, pouring coffee into chipped mugs. Led by that snake Thomas Reed, said they were looking for a woman and child possibly kidnapped by a dangerous fugitive. Her thin lips pressed into a disapproving line. Sheriff Fuller pretended to take them seriously, but he sent word to me straight after they left. "Fuller's on our side," Kane asked, surprise evident. "Fuller's on his own side as usual," Martha corrected. "But his son would have died in that fever last spring if not for my remedies. He owes me." She turned to Maggie. "They're watching the roads and the stage office. Won't be easy getting out of town." "We're not leaving yet," Kane said firmly. "Not until we know what happened to Daniel." Martha's expression softened slightly. "Been wondering when you'd get around to asking." She reached into her apron pocket, extracting a folded piece of paper. "This came 3 weeks ago. Indian Runner brought it from the north. Said to give it to Daniel's sister when she arrived, or to Jonah Kane if she didn't." Maggie accepted the paper with trembling fingers. It was a rough square torn from a ledger book, the handwriting unmistakably Daniel's, the same precise script that had filled his letters from the front lines, cramming as many words as possible into the limited space. If you're reading this, Reed found you. Don't trust him. Coleman killed Jensen and the others. I have proof and the map's other half. Meeting Sioux contacts at Ghost Canyon. If I don't return the evidence, is hidden where Father taught us to fish. Remember the flat stone, same method. Stay with Kane. He's a good man despite the uniform he wore. Tell him Elkhorn Ridge is the key, all my love. Maggie read it twice before passing it to Kane, her heart racing. He was alive 3 weeks ago, she said, hope and fear warring within her. Kane studied the note, his expression grave. Ghost Canyon is Sioux territory, 2 days ride north. Dangerous country even in good weather. He looked up, meeting Maggie's eyes. With snow on the ground, nearly impossible. But not entirely, she challenged. A reluctant smile touched his lips. No, not entirely. Martha watched this exchange with knowing eyes. You'll need supplies, horses, weapons. She rose, moving to a cabinet beside the hearth. Fuller brought these from your cabin, Jonah. Said to tell you Coleman's men burned it to the ground after you escaped. She placed a bundle wrapped in oilskin on the table. Kane unwrapped it to reveal a Colt revolver, a hunting knife, and a small leather pouch. His expression hardened as he checked each item with practiced hands. My home, he said, voice dangerously soft. Everything Mary and I built. They're trying to erase you, Martha said bluntly, same as they did with my John and the others who stood against Coleman. Kane's fingers closed around the revolver knuckles, whitening. Maggie could see the military officer he had once been in the cold precision of his movements, the controlled fury in his eyes. Papa, Ellie's small voice broke the tension. Are we going home now? Kane's expression transformed as he turned to his daughter, the hardness melting into something like grief. No, darling, we can't go home right now. He knelt beside her chair, taking her small hands in his. Bad men burned our house, but we're going to find a new home, I promise. Ellie's eyes filled with tears. My doll, all my things. I know, sweetheart. Kane gathered her into his arms as she began to sob, quiet, heartbreaking sounds muffled against his chest. Over her head, his eyes met Maggie's, filled with a cold resolve that sent a chill down her spine. Coleman will pay for this, he said softly. Martha cleared her throat. Revenge is a luxury you can't afford right now. Getting that child to safety is what matters. She turned to Maggie. There's a mission at Elk Creek 3 days east. Sisters there would look after the girl while you do what needs doing. Kane's arms tightened around Ellie. She stays with me. And if you're killed, Martha challenged, what happens to her then? The question hung in the air, unanswerable. Maggie watched emotions war across Kane's face, the father battling with the soldier love, contending with duty. Before he could respond, a sharp knock rattled the kitchen door. Martha motioned them to silence, then called out, Who's there at this hour? Fuller, came the response. Open up, Martha. It's urgent. The widow exchanged glances with Kane, who had already drawn his revolver and moved to position himself beside the door out of sight. Martha approached cautiously, unbolting the lock with deliberate slowness. Sheriff Fuller burst in the moment the door opened wide enough, a barrel-chested man with a walrus mustache and worried eyes. They're coming, he announced without preamble. Reed and a dozen men. Someone talked. His gaze landed on Maggie and Ellie, then shifted to Kane. You've got minutes, not hours. Back door, Kane asked tersely. Fuller shook his head. They'll have it covered. But, he hesitated, then seemed to make a decision. The church, old Reverend Hopkins, has a root cellar that connects to tunnels the Underground Railroad used before the war. If you can reach it. We'd need a diversion, Kane interrupted. Already arranged. Fuller extracted a pocket watch, checking the time. Fire's about to start at the livery stable. Most of Reed's men will respond to that. He turned to Martha. You should come too. They know you're helping. The widow snorted. Let them come. This is my home, and I'm too old to start running now. Martha, Kane began, but she cut him off with a raised hand. No arguments, Captain Kane. You get that child and this young woman to safety. Her thin shoulders squared with determination. I can buy you time, and unlike you, I have nothing left to lose. A complex emotion crossed Kane's face, respect tinged with sorrow. He nodded once, a soldier acknowledging a comrade's sacrifice. We'll remember. See that you do. Martha moved to a cupboard, extracting a worn carpet bag. Take this. Food, medicines, extra ammunition. She pressed it into Maggie's hands. Go out the back way through the garden. Stay in the shadows. Church is 3 blocks north, white steeple. Maggie clasped the older woman's hands. Thank you. Just find your brother, Martha replied. And make Coleman answer for what he's done to our town. Kane had already wrapped Ellie in her cloak and gathered their few possessions. Fuller checked the street once more, then nodded. Now, before the fire starts, I'll draw their attention east if I can. They slipped into the night like shadows, Kane carrying Ellie, Maggie close behind with the carpet bag and her rifle. The bitter cold stung their faces as they navigated the narrow space between houses, guided by the church steeple silhouetted against the star-filled sky. They had covered perhaps half the distance when the night erupted into chaos. A column of flame shot skyward from the direction of the livery, followed by shouts and running footsteps. Horses whinnied in panic, adding to the confusion. "Keep moving," Kane urged, increasing his pace. "This is our chance." The church loomed ahead, its weathered clapboards ghostly in the moonlight. Kane led them not to the main entrance, but to a small side door, trying the handle with his free hand. It opened with a creak that seemed thunderous in the night air. Inside was pitch darkness, broken only by faint moonlight filtering through stained glass windows. Kane set Ellie down, then froze, his body suddenly tense. Maggie heard it an instant later, the unmistakable click of a revolver's hammer being cocked. "That's far enough," said a voice from the shadows. "Hands where I can see them, Captain Kane." A lantern flared to life, revealing Thomas Reed standing near the altar, a Remington leveled at Kane's chest. He was younger than Maggie had expected, perhaps 35, with the lean, hungry look of a man perpetually unsatisfied with his lot. His smile never reached his cold eyes. "Miss Callahan, I presume?" Reed offered a mocking half-bow. "A pleasure to finally meet my intended bride, though I must say you've led me on quite a chase." Kane shifted subtly, placing himself between Reed and Ellie. "Where are your men, Reed? Or did Coleman only trust you with the easy tasks?" Reed's smile tightened. "They'll be here shortly. The fire was a predictable distraction." He gestured with the revolver. "Now where is Daniel Callahan's map?" "I don't have it," Maggie said, stepping forward. "Neither does Kane." "I don't believe you." Reed's attention shifted to Ellie, who pressed closer to her father's side. "Perhaps the child knows something. Children are wonderfully observant and poor at keeping secrets." Kane's expression turned dangerous. "Touch her and I'll kill you where you stand." Bold words from a man at gunpoint. Reed smiled again, cold and confident. "Coleman wants you alive, Captain. Wants you to see what happens when you defy him. But he didn't specify what condition you need to be in." The revolver shifted slightly. "Now about that map." The crash of breaking glass interrupted him as a window at the far end of the church shattered inward. Reed spun toward the sound, firing blindly into the darkness. In that instant of distraction, Kane moved with the fluid speed of a veteran soldier, drawing his own weapon and shoving Ellie toward Maggie. "Run!" he shouted, firing at Reed. The church erupted into a storm of gunfire. Maggie seized Ellie and dove behind a pew as bullets splintered wood around them. Through the chaos, she glimpsed multiple figures converging, Reed's men drawn by the gunshots despite the diversionary fire. Kane appeared beside them, blood streaming from a cut on his forehead. "This way," he gasped, pulling them toward a small door behind the pulpit. "Reverend's office." They tumbled through as bullets thudded into the heavy oak door behind them. Kane slammed it shut, dragging a heavy desk across to barricade it. The room was tiny, windowless, lined with books, and dominated by a simple writing desk. "The cellar?" Kane said, scanning the floor. "Fuller said there was an entrance." Maggie spotted it first, a worn rug partially concealing a trapdoor. Together they pulled it open, revealing a ladder descending into darkness. Kane went first, then reached up for Ellie, who was shaking with silent terror. The pounding started on the office door, heavy blows that made the hinges groan. "Hurry," Kane urged as Maggie descended, pulling the trapdoor shut above her. The cellar was pitch black and smelled of damp earth and mildew. Kane struck a match, illuminating rough stone walls and a low ceiling supported by ancient timbers. At the far end, a narrow tunnel opened like a mouth in the earth. "Underground railroad," Kane confirmed, his voice tight with controlled urgency. "Should lead all the way to the river." Above them, the office door splintered with a crash of breaking wood. Heavy footsteps crossed the floor, followed by Reed's voice, cold with fury. "Find them! They can't have gone far." Kane extinguished the match, plunging them back into darkness. "Stay close," he whispered. "Follow the wall." They moved into the tunnel, feeling their way forward by touch alone. Ellie clung to Maggie's hand, her small body trembling, but making no sound. Behind them, shouts echoed through the cellar as their pursuers discovered the trapdoor. "Run!" Kane urged, increasing his pace. "Don't stop for anything." The tunnel seemed endless, twisting and turning through the earth beneath Dry Creek. Roots protruded from the ceiling, catching in Maggie's hair. Twice she stumbled over unseen obstacles, Kane's strong grip on her arm the only thing preventing her from falling. When the tunnel finally began to slope upward, Maggie's lungs burned from exertion in the stale air. Ahead, Kane had stopped feeling along the ceiling. There should be another trap door. he muttered, leading to a fisherman's cabin on the riverbank. His searching hands found what they sought, a wooden hatch overhead, secured by a rusted iron latch. It gave way with a protesting creak, allowing cold night air to rush into the tunnel. Kane pulled himself up, then reached down for Ellie and Maggie. They emerged into a dilapidated cabin, its single room bare except for a broken table and the remains of a stone fireplace. Through gaps in the walls, Maggie could see the silvery ribbon of the river partially frozen and ghostly in the moonlight. Kane moved to the doorway, peering cautiously outside. No sign of pursuit yet, but they won't be far behind. He turned back, decision made. We need a boat. It's our only chance now. In winter, Maggie questioned, the river's half frozen. Center channel's still open, currents too strong to freeze completely. Kane checked his revolver, counting remaining bullets with grim efficiency. There's a Sioux winter camp about 10 miles downriver. If we can reach it, we'll have allies. And if we can't, Maggie asked, the weight of their situation settling fully upon her. Kane's eyes met hers in the darkness, hard with resolve, yet somehow gentle. Then we've bought Ellie time to escape. Martha was right, I should have sent her to the mission. He knelt beside his daughter, brushing a strand of hair from her pale face. Ellie listened carefully. If anything happens to Miss Callahan and me, you must find the sisters at Elk Creek Mission. Tell them your name and that your papa sent you. Can you remember that? Ellie nodded, her small face solemn with understanding beyond her years. Elk Creek Mission, she repeated. But you'll be with me, won't you, Papa? Kane's expression cracked slightly, revealing the depth of his fear. I'll do everything I can to stay with you, Starlin. That's a promise. The distant crack of a rifle shot echoed across the water, followed by answering fire from the direction of town. They've found the tunnel entrance, Kane said, urgency returning to his voice. We need to move now. Outside, a narrow dock extended into the river, a small fishing boat tethered at its end. Kane led them toward it, every sense alert for danger. The boat was little more than a flat-bottomed skiff, half filled with icy water that Kane and Maggie bailed frantically using a rusted can found beneath the seat. It'll have to do, Kane decided, helping Ellie aboard. Stay low. Maggie climbed in next, positioning herself in the center, with Ellie held close for warmth. Kane untied the mooring rope and pushed off from the dock, jumping aboard as the current caught them. The boat swung out into the channel, carried by the river's inexorable flow. Without oars, they were at the mercy of the current, drifting between ice floes that scraped against the wooden hull with sounds like ghostly whispers. Kane crouched in the stern, his revolver ready, watching the receding shoreline with predatory focus. They had traveled perhaps half a mile when orange flickers appeared on the bank behind them, torches moving with purpose along the riverside path. They're following, Kane said grimly. Maggie tightened her arms around Ellie, who had begun to shiver violently in the biting cold. How far to the Sioux camp? Too far, Kane admitted. We need shelter before then. There's an old trapper's cabin around the next bend, if it's still standing. The torches grew more numerous, spreading out along both banks. Occasionally a rifle shot rang out, the bullets falling short but signaling their pursuers' determination. The river bent westward, temporarily hiding them from view, but Maggie knew it was only a reprieve, not an escape. When the cabin appeared on the eastern bank, it was little more than a dark shape against the tree line. Kane guided their craft toward shore using a broken plank as a makeshift paddle. The skiff ground against rocky shallows, ice cracking beneath the hull. Stay in the boat until I check it, Kane ordered, splashing into the knee-deep water. Maggie watched anxiously as he approached the cabin, revolver drawn. He disappeared inside for long moments before re-emerging and waving them forward. It's clear, he called. Hurry. Maggie helped Ellie from the boat, then gathered their meager supplies. The frigid water numbed her legs instantly as she waded ashore, urging Ellie ahead toward the promise of shelter. Behind them, the torches had reappeared, moving steadily closer. The cabin's interior was Spartan, a single room with a stone fireplace, a rough-hewn table, and a narrow cot. Animal pelts hung from the walls, providing minimal insulation against the cold. Kane was already working at the hearth, using his knife and a flint to coax sparks into a small pile of kindling. We can't stay long, he said without looking up. They'll search every building along the river. Where can we go? Maggie asked, settling Ellie on the cot and wrapping a musty fur around her shivering form. We're exhausted, half frozen. Ellie can't take much more. A small flame caught in the kindling, casting flickering light across Kane's face. The determination she saw there was tempered with something else, resignation perhaps, or acceptance. "You'll take her east," he said, feeding the growing fire with larger sticks. "To the mission. I'll lead them north toward Ghost Canyon. Make them think we're all together." "No," Maggie protested. "We stay together." "That was the plan." Kane stood, his expression grim in the firelight. "Plans change when circumstances do. Coleman's committed his forces. Now he can't turn back without appearing weak. They'll hunt us relentlessly." His gaze shifted to Ellie, softening. "She's what matters. Getting her to safety." "And Daniel," Maggie challenged, "what about finding my brother?" "I'll find him," Kane promised, "or I'll find out what happened to him. Either way, I'll make sure Coleman pays." He moved to the cabin's single window, peering out at the river. "But first I need to get you and Ellie clear." The torches had drawn closer now, visible through the trees that lined the shore. Their light reflected off the partially frozen river, creating an eerie dance of shadows. "They'll be here within the hour," Kane estimated. "We need to be gone before then." Maggie joined him at the window, their shoulders nearly touching in the narrow space. "There has to be another way," she insisted. "I didn't come all this way to abandon the search for Daniel." "You came to find your brother," Kane corrected, "and now you need to stay alive to do that. Ellie needs you." The simple statement struck Maggie with unexpected force. She glanced back at the child curled beneath the fur, with only her small face visible, watching them with solemn eyes that had seen too much. "I need both of you," Ellie said softly. Kane crossed to his daughter, kneeling beside the cot. "I know, darling, and I'm not leaving forever. Just long enough to lead the bad men away." He smoothed her hair back from her forehead, a gesture of such tenderness it made Maggie's chest ache. "Miss Callahan, we'll take care of you until I come back." "Promise?" Ellie asked, her small voice wavering. Kane hesitated, and in that moment of silence, Maggie heard the lie he couldn't bring himself to tell. He didn't expect to return, was preparing to sacrifice himself to ensure their escape. Before he could answer, a new sound reached them, the rhythmic drumming of hoofbeats approaching from the west, distinct from the torchbearers along the river. Kane was on his feet instantly, revolver drawn. "Get down," he ordered, positioning himself beside the door, "away from the windows." Maggie pulled Ellie from the cot, sheltering her behind the heavy table as the hoofbeats grew louder, then stopped outside the cabin. Tense seconds passed, marked only by the crackling of the small fire and their collective held breath. A voice called from the darkness, not in English, but in the flowing cadence of the Lakota language. Kane's rigid posture relaxed fractionally, though his gun remained ready. "Sue," he whispered to Maggie, "but that doesn't guarantee they're friendly." He moved to the door, calling out a response in the same language, halting but intelligible. After a brief exchange, he opened the door cautiously. 5 mounted warriors sat their horses in the clearing before the cabin, wrapped in heavy buffalo robes against the cold. Their faces were stern, painted with ochre stripes that gleamed in the moonlight. The leader, distinguished by the eagle feathers in his braided hair, spoke again, gesturing northward with a gloved hand. Kane listened intently, then turned to Maggie, urgency in his voice. "They've come from Ghost Canyon. Say they have news of Daniel." Maggie's heart leapt. "What news? Is he alive?" Before Kane could translate the question, a rifle shot cracked through the night air. One of the warriors jerked backward, nearly falling from his horse. The others wheeled their mounts, returning fire into the darkness as more shots followed. "Ambush!" Kane shouted, dragging Maggie and Ellie toward the door. "Coleman's men must have circled around." Outside, chaos erupted. The wounded warrior was helped onto another's horse as the remaining Sioux provided covering fire. Their leader shouted to Kane, gesturing frantically for them to follow. Kane seized Ellie, lifting her onto his shoulders as he ran for the horses. Maggie followed, rifle in hand, firing blindly toward the muzzle flashes that bloomed like deadly flowers in the darkness. A bullet whined past her ear, another splintered wood from the cabin wall, inches from her head. One of the warriors pulled her up behind him onto his horse, strong hands steadying her as the animal danced nervously beneath their combined weight. Kane had mounted behind another warrior, Ellie clutched tightly against his chest. As one, the Sioux wheeled their horses and rode west away from the river and into the dense forest. Bullets followed them, bark exploding from trees as they wove between the trunks. The warrior Maggie rode with leaned low over his horse's neck, and she mimicked the position, feeling branches whip past overhead. They rode hard for what seemed an eternity, the sounds of pursuit gradually fading behind them. When they finally slowed emerging into a small clearing, Maggie was shaking with cold and reaction. The warrior helped her dismount, steadying her when her numb legs nearly buckled. Kane joined her, Ellie still in his arms. The child's eyes were wide with fear, but she made no sound, as if understanding instinctively the need for silence. The Sioux leader approached, speaking rapid Lakota. Kane listened, nodding occasionally, his expression growing more grave with each exchange. "What is it?" Maggie asked when they finished. "What did he say about Daniel?" Kane's eyes met hers, and what she saw there sent ice through her veins. "He says Daniel is alive," he translated, "but he's Coleman's prisoner, being held at Elkhorn Ridge mining camp." "We have to rescue him," Maggie said immediately. "It's not that simple." Kane's voice was heavy. "Coleman's using him as bait. Knows we'll come for him." He hesitated, then delivered the final blow. "And according to their scout, Coleman has brought in special help for the occasion. Professional manhunters from Colorado. Bounty killers." Maggie realized the term familiar from Daniel's letters about frontier justice. Kane nodded grimly. "The worst kind. Men who track humans for spartum and profit." His gaze moved to the Sioux leader, who waited impassively atop his horse. "They're offering to guide us to a safe place. Sacred ground where Coleman's men won't follow." "And Daniel," Maggie pressed, "we can't just leave him." "No," Kane agreed, "we can't." He looked down at his daughter, then back at Maggie, decision crystallizing in his eyes. "But first we need a plan. And allies." The Sioux leader spoke again, pointing northward, where the first hint of dawn was beginning to lighten the sky. His meaning was clear, even without translation. They needed to move now before daylight exposed them. Kane lifted Ellie back onto the warrior's horse, then helped Maggie remount. As they prepared to ride, he paused beside her, hand resting briefly on her knee. "We'll find him," he promised. "And Coleman will pay for what he's done. All of it." In the gray light of approaching dawn, Maggie saw the truth in his eyes, the soldier's determination, the father's fierce protectiveness, and something else. Something that had no place in the midst of danger and pursuit. Something that might in another time and place have blossomed into tenderness. The warrior clicked to his horse, and they moved forward deeper into territory where few white men had ventured. Behind them, the torches of their pursuers still moved along the river, searching for prey that had slipped the trap. Ahead lay unknown dangers and the promise of temporary sanctuary. And somewhere in a mining camp controlled by a man whose cruelty knew no bounds, Daniel Callahan waited, holding half a map and secrets worth killing for. The Sioux winter camp nestled in a sheltered valley, hidden from casual observation by steep ridges and dense pine forest. Smoke rose from a dozen lodges, disappearing into the pale morning sky. As they approached, women paused in their work to watch the strange procession warriors returning with white companions, an unusual sight in these troubled times. Maggie rode stiffly, her body aching from the night's desperate flight. Beside her, Kane sat tall, despite his exhaustion, Ellie sleeping against his chest. The child had finally succumbed to fatigue during the last hours of their journey, lulled by the steady rhythm of the horse's gait. Their guide, who had introduced himself as Two Hawks, led them to the largest lodge at the center of the camp. Outside, a council of elders waited, their lined faces impassive as the newcomers dismounted. "They've been expecting us," Kane murmured to Maggie. "Daniel must have arranged this months ago." An elderly man stepped forward, his face deeply creased, like weathered leather, long gray braids falling over a robe decorated with intricate beadwork. Two Hawks addressed him respectfully, gesturing toward Kane and Maggie as he spoke. "Chief Gray Bear," Kane said softly. "Daniel mentioned him in his notes, said he was a friend to truth speakers." Gray Bear studied them with dark eyes that missed nothing, then spoke in halting English. "The woman has her brother's face." He nodded toward Maggie. "The man has a soldier's eyes but a father's heart." His gaze shifted to the sleeping Ellie. "The child dreams deep. She walks between worlds." Before Maggie could question this cryptic assessment, the chief gestured for them to enter the lodge. Inside, a fire burned in a central pit, the smoke rising to an opening at the peak of the conical structure. Furs lined the perimeter, and dried herbs hung from the supporting poles, filling the air with unfamiliar scents. "Rest first," Gray Bear instructed. "Talk after." Despite her urgent need for information about Daniel, Maggie couldn't deny the wisdom of this approach. She was swaying on her feet, barely able to form coherent thoughts through the fog of exhaustion. Kane appeared equally spent, carefully laying Ellie on a fur pallet before sinking down beside her. A young woman brought them bowls of hot broth rich with unfamiliar flavors that Maggie couldn't identify but found surprisingly restorative. As she drank, warmth spread through her chilled body and her eyelids grew heavy. "Sleep," Kane advised, his voice rough with fatigue. "We're safe for now." Maggie wanted to argue to insist they plan Daniel's rescue immediately, but her body betrayed her. She barely managed to set aside her empty bowl before darkness claimed her. She woke disoriented, unsure how much time had passed. The quality of light filtering through the lodge covering suggested late afternoon. Kane's place beside Ellie was empty, the furs disturbed but cool to the touch. He had been gone for some time. Ellie still slept, her small face peaceful for the first time since Maggie had met her. Careful not to wake the child, Maggie rose and stepped outside. The winter camp bustled with activity, women tanning hides or cooking over open fires, children carrying water from a nearby stream, men repairing weapons or fashioning tools with methodical precision. Life continuing despite the encroachment of miners and soldiers into their traditional territories. She spotted Kane at the far edge of the camp, deep in conversation with two hawks and several other warriors. They stood around what appeared to be a crude map drawn in the snow, gesturing toward the surrounding mountains. As she approached, Kane looked up, acknowledging her with a nod. "How's Ellie?" he asked. "Still sleeping," Maggie replied. "You should have woken me." "You needed the rest." His eyes were shadowed with concern. "How's your head?" Maggie touched the lump on her temple, a souvenir from being thrown from the wagon days earlier. "Better." She turned her attention to the snow map. "What's this?" Two hawks answered in surprisingly good English. "Elkhorn Ridge, where they keep your brother." The map depicted a mining operation built into a steep hillside. Two hawks had used pine twigs to represent buildings, small stones for guard positions. The result was a detailed tactical overview that spoke of careful reconnaissance. "Coleman has 20 men there," Kane explained. "Most are miners or hired guns, but 4 are the bounty hunters I mentioned. Professional killers." His finger traced a path up the ridge. "Daniel's being held here in Coleman's personal cabin, heavily guarded." "Have they hurt him?" Maggie asked, dreading the answer. Two hawks and Kane exchanged glances. "He lives," the Sioux warrior said finally, "but does not stand straight. The yellow-haired chief uses pain to make him speak. Torture." The word hung unspoken between them. Maggie's hands clenched at her sides, nail biting into palms. "We need to get him out, now." "We're working on it," Kane assured her. "But it won't be simple. Coleman has sentries posted all around the camp and the bounty hunters patrol the approaches." His expression was grim. "They're expecting us." "Then we give them what they expect," Maggie said, studying the map with a strategist's eye. Her time in field hospitals had taught her more than medical skills. She had listened to officers planning campaigns, understood the principles of diversion and surprise. "They'll be looking for a frontal rescue attempt, so we don't give them one." Kane raised an eyebrow. "What do you suggest?" "How badly does Coleman want the map?" "Badly enough to torture your brother for weeks." "Then let's offer him what he wants." Maggie knelt beside the snow map, her mind racing ahead. Not the real map, of course. But Coleman doesn't know what Daniel's half looks like, does he? He only knows it exists. Understanding dawned in Kane's eyes. "A forgery." "Exactly." Maggie gestured to the crude representation of Coleman's cabin. "I present myself as willing to trade the map for Daniel's release. While Coleman's attention is on me, we extract Daniel from another direction." Kane finished his expression, shifting from skepticism to consideration. "It could work, but it's dangerous. Coleman's no fool." "Neither am I." Maggie met his gaze steadily. "I grew up with Daniel. I know every detail of how he thinks, how he writes. I can create a forgery he'd believe." Two Hawks spoke rapidly in Lakota to his companions, who nodded their agreement to whatever he proposed. Kane listened, then translated for Maggie. "They're offering warriors to help. Say Daniel honored their sacred places, warned them of Coleman's plans to mine their burial grounds." A hint of respect colored his voice. "Your brother made powerful friends." The sun was setting, casting long shadows across the snow-covered valley when Gray Bear summoned them to council. The lodge was now filled with tribal elders and warriors seated in a circle around the central fire. Ellie, awake but subdued, sat close to her father, watching the proceedings with wide eyes. Gray Bear opened with a lengthy speech in Lakota, which Kane translated in whispers for Maggie. The chief spoke of broken treaties, of white men's hunger for the yellow metal, of how Coleman's operations threatened not just their hunting grounds, but sacred sites where generations of ancestors rested. The man you seek to rescue, Gray Bear continued, switching to English for Maggie's benefit, came to us when others brought only lies. He showed us the maps, warned us of Coleman's plans. The old man's eyes reflected the firelight. For this we will help. But know this, our young men who go with you may not return. Their blood will be on your hands if your courage fails. Maggie straightened, meeting the chief's penetrating gaze. My brother risked his life to protect your people's rights. I'll do no less to save him. Gray Bear studied her for a long moment, then nodded once, apparently satisfied. Tomorrow at first light you will go. Tonight prepare your spirit. He gestured to a young woman who approached with a small leather pouch. This will help make your false map look old, stained from sacred roots. As the council dispersed, two hawks remained to outline their plan. Using a mixture of Lakota English and gestures, he explained the approach they would take, a grueling route through high mountain passes that would bring them to Elkhorn Ridge from the north where sentries were fewest. Snow is deep, he warned, trail dangerous, but Coleman's men do not watch this way. Later, as Maggie worked by firelight to create the forgery, Kane sat beside her, cleaning his revolver with methodical precision. Ellie had been entrusted to the care of a Lakota woman with kind eyes and gentle hands who had taken her to meet the tribe's children. She seems happy, Maggie observed, glancing up from her work. Children adapt quickly. Kane's hands stilled momentarily. Too quickly, sometimes. She barely mentions our home anymore. Already accepts this new reality. A shadow crossed his face. She's lost so much, her mother, her home, everything familiar. Yet she smiles, makes friends with children who don't even speak her language. Children are resilient, Maggie said softly, and she has you. For how long? Kane's voice held an edge of bitterness. Coleman won't stop hunting us. Even if we rescue Daniel, even if we expose Coleman's crimes, we'll never be safe as long as he lives. His gray eyes met hers. And I won't raise my daughter looking over my shoulder for killers. The implications were clear for Kane. This mission wasn't just about rescuing Daniel or exposing corruption. It was about eliminating the threat permanently. Maggie returned to her forgery, carefully applying the stain Gray Bear had provided to age the paper. There are legal ways to fight men like Coleman. Not in the Black Hills. Kane reassembled his revolver with swift, practiced movements. Out here, law is whatever the man with the most gold says it is. Coleman's bought every official from Deadwood to Cheyenne. Then we gather evidence. Daniel mentioned proof in his note. Kane holstered his weapon. And if that fails, if Coleman walks free despite everything he's done, his voice hardened. Would you still stand on principle if Daniel dies while justice deliberates? The question struck at the heart of Maggie's moral certainty. Before the war, she would have answered without hesitation, believing in the sanctity of law and order. But she had seen too much in those bloody years, good men dying, while corrupt officials profited justice delayed until it became meaningless. No, she admitted finally. If it came to that, I wouldn't. She met his gaze directly. But killing should be the last resort, not the first. Something shifted in Kane's expression, respect perhaps, or simple acknowledgement of her position. Fair enough. He glanced at her forgery, now taking shape as a convincing replica of an old map. You have a steady hand. Field surgery teaches precision, Maggie replied, adding a final touch to the false document. This should pass inspection unless examined too closely. Kane leaned forward, studying her work. Daniel's handwriting? Close enough. We had similar penmanship as children. She set the map aside to dry. What's our timeline once we reach Elkhorn Ridge? Two hawks suggest dawn assault. Guards are tired, changing shifts. Kane's voice took on the crisp efficiency of a military officer. You'll approach from the main trail under white flag. I'll lead a team from the north slope while Coleman's focused on you. And if something goes wrong, if Coleman recognizes the forgery immediately. Kane's eyes hardened. Then I'll do whatever's necessary to get you and Daniel out alive. The unspoken implication hung between them that he might sacrifice himself if required. That's not acceptable, Maggie said firmly. Ellie needs her father. Ellie needs to be safe, Kane countered. Everything else is secondary. Before Maggie could argue further, Two Hawks entered the lodge, his expression grave. Riders, he announced. White men. Many horses. Kane was on his feet instantly. Coleman's men. How did they find us? Two Hawks shook his head. Not Coleman. Different men. One wears star. He tapped his chest, indicating a badge. Marshal, you call them? Maggie and Kane exchanged surprised glances. Federal marshals, Maggie asked. Here. Daniel's message, Kane realized. He said he was trying to reach the federal authorities at Fort Laramie. Perhaps he succeeded before Coleman captured him. They followed two Hawks to the edge of the camp where Gray Bear and several warriors had already gathered to observe the approaching riders. In the fading light, Maggie counted 6 men on horseback, led by a tall figure in a long duster coat. Even at a distance, the glint of a marshal's badge was visible on his chest. Gray Bear spoke without taking his eyes from the riders. They come in peace, or they would not reach our valley alive. Kane nodded grimly. Let's hear what they have to say before we decide if they're friends or enemies. As the riders drew closer, Maggie studied the leader, a lean man with a weather-beaten face and the watchful eyes of someone accustomed to danger. He reined in his horse at a respectful distance from the Sioux gathering, raising an empty hand in greeting. I'm looking for Jonah Kane and Margaret Callahan, he called. Name's Marshal James Harker, Federal District Court, Wyoming Territory. Kane stepped forward, positioning himself subtly between the newcomers and Maggie. I'm Kane. This is Miss Callahan. What business brings a federal marshal to Sioux territory? Harker dismounted, moving with the careful precision of a man who understood he was being evaluated by many eyes. Information provided by Daniel Callahan. He withdrew a folded paper from inside his coat. I have a federal warrant for the arrest of Marshal Coleman on charges of fraud, illegal mining operations on treaty lands, and murder. Maggie moved to Kane's side. You've spoken with my brother. No, ma'am. Harker's expression revealed nothing. His information came through intermediaries, Sioux runners who reached Fort Laramie with documents and maps. He glanced at Gray Bear. The chief here likely knows more than I do about how that was arranged. Gray Bear remained impassive. The blue coat speaks true words. Young Callahan's message traveled on swift feet to the fort. Then you know Coleman has my brother, Maggie pressed. Harker nodded grimly. We received that intelligence yesterday. It's why I'm here with only 5 men instead of a proper force. Time's critical. His gaze shifted to Kane. I understand you have the other half of Callahan's map. Kane's hand moved fractionally closer to his holstered revolver. What makes you think that? Because Daniel Callahan's last message said you did. Harker's voice remained even. Look, I'm not here to confiscate anything. That gold's on treaty land legally. It belongs to the Sioux Nation. I'm here for Coleman, nothing else. Kane studied the marshal with narrowed eyes, weighing his words. Finally, he turned to Gray Bear. What do you think, Chief? Is this man trustworthy? The old man considered for a long moment. His eyes do not shift when he speaks, but a snake can hold still when hunting. He gestured toward the camp. He and his men may enter, but without guns. They will eat and speak, then we will know. Harker accepted these terms without argument, instructing his men to surrender their weapons before dismounting. It was a significant gesture of trust or a calculated risk that did not go unnoticed by the watching Sioux. As they walked toward Gray Bear's lodge, Maggie fell into step beside the marshal. How badly is my brother injured? Harker's expression softened slightly. Our information suggests he's alive but in poor condition. Coleman's been persistent in his questioning. Torture, Maggie said bluntly. Yes, ma'am. Harker didn't sugarcoat the truth, which is why we need to move quickly. Coleman's growing desperate. Word is he's planning to abandon the Black Hills operation, move everything to Montana territory. If that happens before we reach him, he'll kill Daniel, Kane finished. Leave no witnesses. Harker nodded grimly. Exactly. Inside Gray Bear's lodge, the marshal and his senior deputy joined the Sioux Council while the remaining lawmen were escorted to another lodge. Ellie had been brought back by her Lakota caretaker and now sat sleepily against her father's side as the adults discussed strategy around the fire. Harker spread a detailed map of the region across the earth floor. Coleman's operation at Elkhorn Ridge is well defended. Main approach follows this valley, perfect kill zone if they spot us coming. His finger traced alternate routes. Southern approach is no better. Sheer cliffs, narrow trails. Two Hawks suggest northern approach, Kane said. High pass through these ridges. He indicated the route on the map. Difficult terrain, but less guarded. Harker studied the suggested path. Might work, but it's slow going with horses. We'd lose the element of surprise. Unless you had a distraction, Maggie interjected. She outlined her plan to approach under a white flag offering the forged map in exchange for Daniel's release. Coleman wants that map badly enough that he'll focus on me. That gives you time to position your men. The marshal frowned. Too risky. Coleman's not known for honoring agreements. I'm not suggesting we actually make the exchange, Maggie clarified. Just create the opportunity for your men and Kane to extract Daniel while Coleman's attention is elsewhere. Harker turned to Kane. You're willing to let her take that risk. Something flashed in Kane's eyes, a mixture of respect and concern. Miss Callahan makes her own decisions. She's proven herself more than capable. It's my brother, Maggie said simply. My responsibility. The discussion continued late into the night, refining the plan until every contingency had been addressed. The marshal's experience brought valuable perspective, while Two Hawks' intimate knowledge of the terrain proved essential for planning their approach. Dawn would see them departing in two groups, Maggie riding with Harker, and two deputies along the main trail, making no effort to conceal their approach. Kane leading the remaining deputies and a small force of Sioux warriors through the treacherous northern pass to position themselves for the rescue. As the council concluded, one critical question remained unaddressed. Kane raised it as they prepared to leave the lodge. What about Coleman himself? Your warrant calls for arrest, but he won't surrender peacefully. Harker's expression hardened. I'm authorized to use whatever force necessary to apprehend him. If that means he doesn't reach a courtroom alive, so be it. The marshal's words should have troubled Maggie's conscience more than they did. Instead, she found herself nodding in agreement. Some men placed themselves beyond the reach of civilized justice through their own actions. Coleman, who had tortured her brother and threatened a child, had forfeited any claim to mercy. Later, as she prepared for the few hours of sleep remaining before their departure, Maggie found Kane outside the lodge staring at the star-filled sky. Ellie had already been settled for the night once again under the care of the Lakota woman who had taken a special interest in the child. You should rest, Maggie said, drawing her shawl tighter against the bitter cold. Too much on my mind. Kane's breath formed white clouds in the frigid air. Wondering if I'm doing the right thing bringing Harker into this. If he's truly who he claims to be. You don't trust him. I don't trust anyone wearing a federal badge on principle. A ghost of a smile touched Kane's lips. Old habits from the war. Gray Bear seems to have accepted him. Gray Bear's a better judge of character than I am. Kane turned to face her, his expression serious. If something goes wrong tomorrow, if Coleman or his men get their hands on you. They won't, Maggie interrupted. The plan is solid. Plans rarely survive first contact with the enemy. The soldier in him spoke from bitter experience. Promise me you'll prioritize your own safety. Don't try to be a hero. That's rich coming from you, Maggie observed wryly. You're planning to risk everything to save a man you barely know simply because he's my brother. Kane's gaze held hers steadily. Is that what you think, that I'm doing this for Daniel? The implication hung between them, too significant to be dismissed, too fragile to be acknowledged directly. In the space of a few days, they had moved from suspicious strangers to reluctant allies, to something neither of them had anticipated, something that had no place in the midst of danger, yet had taken root nonetheless. Why are you doing it then? Maggie asked softly. Kane's hand rose, hesitated, then gently touched her cheek, a gesture so unexpected that Maggie found herself holding her breath. Because some things are worth fighting for, worth dying for if necessary. His voice roughened, and some people change everything just by existing. Before Maggie could respond, the moment was interrupted by approaching footsteps. Kane withdrew his hand as Two Hawks emerged from the darkness, coming to inform them of final preparations for the morning's departure. The warrior seemed oblivious to the tension between them, focusing on practical details of the journey ahead. When he departed, the intimate moment had passed, replaced by the pressing reality of their mission. We should get some sleep, Kane said finally. Dawn comes early. Maggie nodded, unable to trust her voice. As they turned towards separate lodges, Kane paused once more. Whatever happens tomorrow, Maggie, I want you to know. He stopped searching for words. I'm glad you got thrown from that wagon near my home. It wasn't a declaration of love. They had known each other too briefly, had too uncertain a future for such pronouncements. But in its own way, it acknowledged the connection that had formed between them against all odds. "So am I, Tom," Maggie replied simply. Sleep proved elusive, her mind replaying Kane's words and the gentle touch that had accompanied them. For years after William's death, she had closed herself off from such possibilities, focusing solely on finding Daniel and building a life of independence. Now, on the eve of the most dangerous undertaking of her life, she found herself contemplating a future she had never expected, one that included not just her brother, but a former Confederate captain and his solemn-eyed daughter. Dawn broke clear and cold, the eastern sky painted in shades of pink and gold that belied the grim purpose of the day ahead. The camp stirred to life as warriors prepared for battle and women packed provisions for the journey. Ellie found Maggie as she was checking the forgery one last time. The child's face was solemn, her eyes too knowing for one so young. "Papa says you're going to help bring my Uncle Daniel home." Maggie knelt to her level. "That's right, sweetheart. Your father and I are going to help him. And then we'll all be together." Hope tinged the question. The simple inquiry carried weight far beyond its words. Maggie chose her response carefully. "I hope so, Ellie. I truly do." The girl nodded, accepting this qualified answer with the pragmatism of a child who had already learned that adults couldn't promise certainties. She reached into her pocket, extracting a small object wrapped in a scrap of buckskin. "The medicine woman said to give you this." She placed it in Maggie's hand. "For protection." Inside the buckskin was a small stone amulet, polished smooth and etched with symbols Maggie didn't recognize. A leather thong had been threaded through a hole at one end, forming a necklace. "It's beautiful," Maggie said, genuinely touched by the gesture. "Will you help me put it on?" Ellie's face brightened as she carefully tied the thong around Maggie's neck. "Now the spirits will watch over you," she said with childlike certainty. Harker's voice called from outside, announcing it was time to depart. Maggie hugged Ellie tightly, inhaling the sweet scent of her hair, committing it to memory. "Take care of yourself until we return," she whispered. "Mind the Lakota women and stay close to camp." "I will," Ellie promised, "and I'll keep watch for you and Papa from the high rock." The medicine woman showed me how to send prayers to the sky. The innocence and faith in her voice nearly undid Maggie's composure. She kissed the child's forehead, then rose quickly, unable to trust herself with further farewells. Outside, the two parties were assembling. Kane stood with two Hawks and the Sioux warriors who would accompany them on the northern route, checking weapons and provisions. His face was set in the hard lines of a soldier preparing for battle, all personal feelings locked away behind a mask of professional detachment. When he saw Maggie, however, that mask slipped momentarily. He crossed to her side, speaking low enough that others couldn't hear. "The marshal's men will protect you, but if anything feels wrong, anything at all, you ride away as fast as that horse will carry you. Understand?" "I understand." Maggie straightened her shoulders, adopting the calm efficiency that had served her well in field hospitals. "But the plan will work. We'll have Daniel free by midday." Kane's expression suggested he wasn't as confident, but he nodded. "Just remember what matters most, staying alive. Everything else is secondary." "Including you," Maggie challenged brutally. A muscle worked in his jaw. "Especially me." Before she could protest this selfless declaration, Harker approached, interrupting the moment. "Time to move out, Miss Callahan. We need to reach the ridge by mid-morning to make this work." With a final glance at Kane, Maggie moved to her assigned horse, a steady sorrel mare chosen for its calm temperament rather than speed. The forged map was secured in an oilskin packet inside her coat, along with her small revolver. Her rifle was strapped to the saddle, visible evidence of her ability to defend herself if necessary. As the two groups prepared to depart in opposite directions, Ellie broke away from her caretaker, running first to her father for a fierce hug, then to Maggie's side. Kane lifted her up for a final embrace, whispering something in her ear that made the child nod solemnly. When he set her down, Ellie looked up at Maggie, her small face determined. "Bring Papa home safe," she said, a command rather than a request. "Promise." The weight of that childish demand settled on Maggie's shoulders like a physical burden. She had been focused on rescuing Daniel, on bringing her brother home alive. Now she realized with perfect clarity that she had taken responsibility for something equally precious, the father this child so desperately needed. I promise, Ellie, she said the words feeling like a vow written in blood. We'll both come back to you. As they rode out of the camp, Maggie with Harker toward the main trail, Kane with two hawks toward the treacherous mountain pass, the certainty of that promise sustained her. She had survived the bloodiest battles of the Civil War, had rebuilt her life after William's suicide, had crossed half a continent alone, based on nothing more than hope and determination. She would not fail now with so much at stake. The trail descended from the valley, winding through pine forest frosted with snow. Harker rode beside her, his deputy scouts ranging ahead and behind. The marshal maintained a professional silence, focused on the mission ahead, but occasionally glanced at Maggie with what might have been concern. You're very calm for someone riding into danger, he observed finally. I've faced danger before, Maggie replied. Field hospitals during the war weren't exactly safe havens. Harker nodded, respect evident in his expression. Your brother spoke highly of you in his communications, said you were the strongest person he knew. Daniel exaggerates, Maggie said, though the words warmed her. We haven't seen each other in years. Some things don't change. Harker adjusted his hat against the morning sun, family being one of them. As they rode, Maggie's thoughts turned to Kane and his party navigating the treacherous northern approach. Their route would be far more difficult, narrow ledges, deep snow, the constant risk of avalanche. Yet it offered the element of surprise they needed to succeed. By mid-morning, they had reached a ridge overlooking Elkhorn mining camp. Harker signaled a halt, dismounting to study the operation through a brass spyglass. Coleman's cabin is the large structure at the center, he reported. Guards posted at all approaches. Men in the yard appear armed with rifles. He handed the glass to Maggie. See for yourself. Where through the spyglass, the mining camp came into sharp focus, a collection of wooden buildings surrounded by raw excavations cut into the hillside. Men moved about with the purposeful efficiency of a military operation rather than a civilian enterprise. At the center stood a substantial cabin with a covered porch, clearly the command center. How many men do you count? Harker asked. Maggie scanned methodically. 15 visible, possibly more inside the buildings. She focused on the main cabin. 2 guards on the porch, armed with shotguns, not rifles, close-quarter weapons. Harker raised an eyebrow, impressed by her observation. You have a soldier's eye, Miss Callahan. I had 3 years to learn from the best strategists in the Union Army, Maggie replied, returning the spyglass. Now shall we proceed with the plan? The marshal checked his pocket watch. Kane's group should be in position within the hour. We'll approach once we see their signal. They withdrew to a sheltered position to wait the minutes crawling by with excruciating slowness. Maggie found herself touching the stone amulet Ellie had given her, drawing strange comfort from the smooth texture against her fingers. Finally, Harker spotted what they had been waiting for, a flash of reflected sunlight from the northern ridge, brief but unmistakable. Kane and his warriors were in position. That's our cue, the marshal said. Remember, our job is to keep Coleman distracted. The moment you sense something's wrong, you get clear. Understood. Maggie nodded, mounting her horse with renewed determination. They would proceed as planned, she and Harker approaching under a white flag, the deputies remaining hidden as backup. The forgery felt heavy inside her coat, a crucial prop in the dangerous theater they were about to perform. As they rode toward the mining camp, a white handkerchief tied to Harker's rifle barrel, Maggie steeled herself for what lay ahead. Somewhere in that collection of buildings, Daniel waited, possibly injured, certainly in danger. And on the northern ridge, Kane prepared to risk everything for a man he barely knew because of her. The guards spotted them when they were still 100 yards out. Rifles were raised, voices called warnings. Harker kept their pace steady, his free hand raised to show peaceful intent. Federal Marshal, he shouted when they were within earshot, here to speak with Marshal Coleman on official business. After a brief consultation, one guard disappeared inside the main cabin. Minutes later, the door opened again, and a figure emerged onto the porch. Even at a distance, Marshal Coleman cut an impressive figure, tall and broad-shouldered, his bearing unmistakably military despite his civilian clothes. A thick beard covered the lower half of his face, and he wore a fur-lined coat against the winter chill. The sunlight glinted off something metallic at his chest. Not a badge, but what appeared to be a military medal worn as a deliberate reminder of past glories. Marshal Harker, he called, his voice carrying clearly across the distance. This is an unexpected pleasure. And who's your lovely companion? Margaret Callahan, Harker replied. She has a proposition you might find interesting. Coleman's posture changed subtly, a predator scenting prey. Indeed. He gestured toward the cabin. Please dismount and join me. We'll discuss this proposition in comfort. As they approached the porch, Maggie felt Coleman's eyes assessing her, searching for resemblance to her brother, calculating her value as a bargaining chip or hostage. She met his gaze with deliberate calm, revealing nothing of the hatred burning inside her for this man who had tortured Daniel and threatened a child. Coleman's smile never reached his cold eyes. Miss Callahan, I believe I've had the pleasure of entertaining your brother these past weeks. He stepped aside, gesturing toward the cabin door with exaggerated courtesy. Please come inside. I think we have much to discuss. With Harker at her side, Maggie crossed the threshold into the lion's den, acutely aware that their lives now depended on Kane's ability to execute his part of the plan without detection. The door closed behind them with the finality of a prison gate, sealing them in with a man whose reputation for ruthlessness was about to be put to the test. The interior of Coleman's cabin belied the rough frontier setting. Persian rugs covered the plank floor, leather-bound books lined custom-built shelves, and a massive oak desk dominated the room like a general's command post. A fire roared in a stone hearth, pushing back the winter chill. But Maggie noticed none of these luxuries. Her attention fixed instantly on the figure slumped in a chair near the fire, a man so gaunt and battered that for a heartbreaking moment she failed to recognize her own brother. Daniel Callahan had been a robust, handsome young man when he left for the Black Hills. The skeletal figure before her bore only the faintest resemblance to that vibrant youth. His face was a mottled map of bruises, one eye swollen shut, dried blood crusting his split lips. His left arm hung at an unnatural angle, clearly broken and improperly set. Daniel, she whispered, taking an involuntary step forward. Coleman moved smoothly between them. Family reunions can wait, Miss Callahan. First, we have business to discuss. He gestured toward chairs arranged before the desk. Please sit. Daniel's head lifted at the sound of his sister's voice. His one functioning eye widened in recognition, then horror. Maggie, no, you shouldn't be here. His voice emerged as a rasped throat raw from screaming or thirst. Quiet, Coleman snapped, his genteel facade slipping momentarily. To Maggie, he continued with forced civility. Your brother has been my guest while we work through a misunderstanding regarding some property. Property that doesn't belong to you? Harker interjected, remaining standing despite Coleman's invitation to sit. I have a federal warrant for your arrest, Coleman. Fraud, illegal mining operations on treaty lands, and murder. Coleman's smile never faltered, though his eyes hardened to chips of ice. Serious charges, Marshal. I assume you have evidence? We do, Harker confirmed, including testimony from your former associates and documentation of your operations on Sioux territory. How unfortunate for those former associates. Coleman's emphasis carried clear menace. He moved behind his desk with deliberate casualness, opening a humidor to select a cigar. But we both know federal warrants mean little in these territories unless backed by sufficient force. His gaze flicked to the window. And I don't see a posse outside Marshall. Maggie forced herself to focus on their plan rather than Daniel's condition. Every moment they kept Coleman talking was another moment for Kane and his team to get into position. I came here to offer you a trade, she said, drawing Coleman's attention back to her. The map you've been looking for in exchange for my brother's freedom. Interest sparked in Coleman's eyes, though he maintained his mask of indifference. What map would that be, Miss Callahan? Don't play games, Maggie said sharply. You've tortured my brother for weeks trying to find it. The map to the gold deposit in the Black Hills. Coleman lit his cigar, taking his time before responding. And what makes you think I'd trade your brother for something I could simply take from you right now? Because the map isn't here, Harker said. It's with my deputies who have instructions to deliver it to the territorial governor if we don't return by sundown. A clever improvisation that Maggie hadn't anticipated. She kept her expression neutral, giving no indication that the forgery was actually concealed inside her coat. Coleman studied them through a veil of cigar smoke, calculating. A reasonable precaution, but it still doesn't explain why I should accept this offer when I could simply wait for Jonah Kane to attempt a rescue. His smile turned predatory. Oh yes, I know he's with you. My scouts tracked you to the Sioux camp. Maggie's blood ran cold. If Coleman knew about Kane knew they had been at the Sioux camp, did he also know about their plan? Were Kane and the others riding into a trap? Kane is dead, she lied smoothly. Killed during an ambush at the river crossing 2 days ago. Coleman's eyebrow lifted. Is that so? Then who accompanied you to the Sioux camp? My scouts were quite certain. Your scouts saw what we wanted them to see, Harker interrupted. A diversion to keep your attention focused in the wrong direction. For the first time, uncertainty flickered across Coleman's face, exactly the reaction they needed. If he believed Kane was dead, he'd be less prepared for an attack from the northern ridge. Enough games, Coleman said finally. Let's assume I'm interested in your offer. How would this exchange work? Simple, Maggie replied. You release my brother into Marshal Harker's custody. Once we're safely away, the map will be delivered to a location of your choosing. Coleman laughed, a sound devoid of humor. How trusting you think I am, Miss Callahan. No, I propose a different arrangement. He moved to the window, peering out at the mining camp. You will produce this map, or rather direct your deputies to bring it here. I'll examine it for authenticity. If satisfied, I'll consider releasing your brother. That wasn't the offer, Harker said firmly. It's the only one I'm making. Coleman turned from the window, his expression hardening. And time is short. My patience with your brother has reached its limit. As if to emphasize the point, he crossed to where Daniel sat and casually pressed his cigar into the exposed skin of his forearm. Daniel jerked, a strangled cry escaping his cracked lips. Rage surged through Maggie, nearly overwhelming her control. Only the knowledge of Kane's imminent attack kept her from lunging at Coleman. Stop, she demanded. I have the map with me. Both Coleman and Harker turned to her in surprise, though Harker's was genuine, while Coleman's held a hint of satisfaction. Maggie, no, Daniel croaked. He'll kill us all once he has it. I know what I'm doing, Maggie insisted, meeting her brother's gaze with silent communication. Trust me. She reached slowly into her coat, extracting the oilskin packet containing the forgery. Coleman watched with poorly concealed eagerness as she unwrapped it and spread the document on his desk. The forgery was impressive, aged with the Lakota stain. Daniel's handwriting meticulously reproduced, the torn edge matching perfectly with the half Kane possessed. Coleman bent over it, examining the details with growing excitement. Remarkable, he murmured. All this time, and the answer was so simple. His finger traced the indicated location. This matches what I suspected, but confirmation is valuable. While Coleman was distracted by the map, Maggie caught Harker's eye, a subtle nod confirming it was time to prepare for what came next. The marshal's hand drifted casually toward his holstered revolver. We've fulfilled our end of the bargain, Maggie said. Now release my brother. Coleman looked up, his moment of vulnerability vanishing behind cold calculation. I'm afraid there's a problem, Miss Callahan. This map is only half the solution. Without Kane's portion, it's useless. That wasn't our agreement, Harker said, his stance shifting subtly into a fighter's readiness. Agreements change. Coleman's hand moved to a drawer in his desk, just as my patience has limits. The tension in the room stretched to breaking point. Any moment now, Kane and his force would attack if they hadn't been captured or killed already. Maggie needed to keep Coleman talking just a little longer. I can get you Kane's half, she offered. He trusted me, told me where it's hidden before he died. Coleman's hand paused. An interesting proposition, but one that requires verification of your honesty. In a lightning-fast movement, he withdrew a revolver from the drawer, aiming it directly at Daniel's head. Perhaps a demonstration of my seriousness will help. Before he could pull the trigger, the cabin was rocked by an enormous explosion from the far side of the camp. Windows rattled and dust sifted from the ceiling logs. Shouts of alarm rose from outside, followed by gunfire. Kane's attack had begun. Coleman's momentary distraction was all Harker needed. The marshal drew and fired in one fluid motion, his bullet striking Coleman's shoulder with enough force to spin the larger man backward. Coleman kept his grip on his weapon, returning fire as he dove for cover behind the massive desk. Get Daniel, Harker shouted to Maggie, firing again to keep Coleman pinned down. Maggie rushed to her brother, supporting his weight as he struggled to stand. His condition was worse up close. Weeks of torture had left him barely able to walk. She pulled his good arm across her shoulders, bearing as much of his weight as her smaller frame could manage. You shouldn't have come, Daniel gasped, even as he leaned heavily against her. Too dangerous. Apparently stubbornness runs in the family, Maggie replied, guiding him toward the door as Harker provided covering fire. Outside, chaos had engulfed the mining camp. Smoke billowed from several buildings, gunfire echoed from multiple directions, and men ran in confusion, unsure where the attack was coming from. Kane had executed his plan perfectly, simultaneous assaults from different angles creating the illusion of a much larger force. Harker kicked the cabin door open, revolver raised. "Stay behind me," he ordered, checking for immediate threats before motioning them forward. They emerged onto the porch just as riders burst into the central clearing, Kane leading the charge rifle blazing two hawks, and the Sioux warriors flanking him with war cries that chilled the blood. The marshal's deputies appeared from another direction, adding to the confusion. There, Maggie pointed toward Kane, relief flooding through her at the sight of him still alive, still fighting. Before they could move, Coleman staggered onto the porch behind them, blood streaming from his wounded shoulder, but rage giving him strength. "You're not leaving with him," he snarled, raising his revolver. Harker spun, firing twice. The bullet struck Coleman in the chest, driving him back against the cabin wall. But even mortally wounded, Coleman's determination remained unbroken. With his last strength, he steadied his weapon, aiming not at Harker or Maggie, but at Kane, who was dismounting 20 yards away. "No!" Maggie cried, seeing his intention. Harker threw himself forward, knocking Coleman's arm upward as the gun discharged. The bullet went wild, splintering a support post instead of finding its intended target. Coleman collapsed, his hatred outlasting his strength as darkness claimed him. In the clearing, Kane had spotted them. He fought his way toward the cabin. Two hawks covering his advance as hired guns fell back in disarray, many already fleeing into the surrounding forest. "We need to move now," Harker urged, taking Daniel's weight from Maggie. "My men have secured the horses at the South Trail." But Maggie hesitated, unwilling to leave without ensuring Kane's safety. She watched in horror as one of Coleman's bounty hunters emerged from behind a supply shed, leveling a rifle at Kane's unprotected back. Without conscious thought, Maggie drew her small revolver and fired. The distance was extreme for such a weapon, but desperation guided her aim. The bounty hunter staggered, her bullet striking his shoulder rather than his heart, but disrupting his shot enough that it merely grazed Kane's arm instead of killing him. Kane whirled at the sound, dispatching the wounded hunter with a single shot before continuing toward her. Their eyes met across the chaos of battle relief, visible even at a distance. "Come on!" Harker shouted, already moving Daniel toward the relative cover of a woodpile. "We can't stay exposed." Bullets whined through the air as the remaining loyal members of Coleman's force rallied for a final stand. Maggie reluctantly followed Harker, ducking behind the stacked logs as splinters flew. Kane reached them moments later, sliding into cover beside Maggie. Blood streaked his face from a cut above his eye, and his coat was torn in several places, but he appeared otherwise unharmed. "Daniel," he asked immediately. "Alive, but badly injured," Maggie replied. "We need to get him to a doctor." Kane nodded grimly. "Two hawks has cleared the South Trail. Horses are waiting." His eyes met hers, intense with unspoken emotion. "You did it." "We did it," she corrected. A hail of bullets interrupted their brief reunion, forcing them lower behind the woodpile. The bounty hunters had organized a counterattack, pinning them down with concentrated fire. "We need to split up," Harker decided. "Draw their fire in different directions." He looked at Kane. "Can your Sioux friends provide a diversion?" Kane nodded. "They're already circling behind the hunters. When they attack, we move." He took Daniel's weight from Harker. "You lead Marshal. We'll follow." Harker checked his revolver, grimacing at the limited ammunition remaining. "Head straight for the trees. Don't stop for anything." The signal came moments later, a piercing war cry followed by mounted Sioux warriors charging the bounty hunter's position from behind. In the resulting confusion, Harker broke cover, firing rapidly to clear their path. Kane half-carried, half-dragged Daniel toward the tree line, Maggie guarding their rear. They had nearly reached safety when a bullet struck the ground at Maggie's feet, followed by another that tore through her skirt, narrowly missing flesh. She turned to see one of the bounty hunters pursuing them, a tall man with a scarred face and cold eyes. Unlike the others, he moved with methodical precision, each shot carefully aimed despite the chaos around him. A professional killer focused on completing his contract despite his employer's death. Maggie raised her revolver, but the hammer fell on an empty chamber she had used her last bullet, saving Kane. The hunter smiled, recognizing her predicament, as he leveled his weapon for a killing shot. A thunderous report split the air, and the hunter pitched forward, a surprised expression frozen on his face as he collapsed. Behind him stood Two Hawk's rifle still raised, nodding once to Maggie, before wheeling his horse to rejoin the battle. Kane had reached the trees with Daniel, where Harker waited with the horses. Maggie ran to join them, her heart pounding with the narrowness of their escape. Together they helped Daniel onto a horse, Kane mounting behind him to keep the injured man upright. "The South Trail will take you to Fort Laramie," Harker said, swinging into his own saddle. "My men will cover your retreat." "You're not coming?" Maggie asked, mounting the sorrel mare that had carried her to the camp. Harker shook his head. "Someone needs to secure this site, recover Coleman's records. Evidence for the territorial court." His expression hardened. "And I've got wounded deputies to account for." Kane extended his hand to the marshal. "We owe you our lives." "Just doing my job," Harker replied, clasping Kane's hand briefly. "Besides, your Sioux friends turned the tide. I'd have been outgunned without them." Two Hawks appeared at the edge of the trees, his face streaked with war paint and soot from the fires. "Path clear," he reported. "But more white men coming from Deadwood. Many horses." "Coleman's reinforcements," Kane realized. "We need to move now." With a final nod to Harker, they urged their horses down the narrow trail, leaving the sounds of battle behind. Daniel slumped against Kane, barely conscious, his injuries taking a heavy toll with each jostling step. "Hold on," Maggie encouraged her brother, riding close beside them. "Just a little longer." Daniel's good eye opened, focusing on her with effort. "Always trying to save me," he managed, a ghost of his old smile flickering across his battered face. "Since we were kids." "Someone had to," Maggie replied, her voice catching. "You were always rushing headlong into trouble." "Not much has changed," Kane observed dryly. The trail descended sharply, winding through dense pine forest. Fresh snow had begun to fall, erasing their tracks almost as quickly as they made them a blessing if pursuit came but a hazard for travel. The temperature was dropping rapidly as the brief winter daylight began to fade. "We won't reach Fort Laramie before dark," Kane said, voicing what Maggie had already realized. "Need to find shelter for the night. Daniel won't survive in the open." Two Hawks riding ahead as Scout gestured toward a valley to the east. "Old trapper cabin, 2 hours ride. Good shelter." Kane nodded his agreement. "Lead the way." As they altered course following a game trail barely visible beneath the new snow, Maggie found herself riding beside Kane and her brother. Daniel had fallen into a state of semi-consciousness, his head lolling against Kane's shoulder. "How bad?" she asked quietly, not wanting to alarm Daniel if he could still hear them. Kane's expression was grim. "Bad. Broken arm for certain. Ribs too from the sound of his breathing. Fever setting in." He adjusted his hold as Daniel stirred restlessly. "He needs more care than we can provide in the wilderness." "Will he make it to Fort Laramie?" "I don't know," Kane admitted, "but he's survived this long. That says something about his strength." Maggie studied her brother's face, barely recognizable beneath the bruises and dried blood. The boy who had chased her through Virginia meadows, the young man who had marched off to war with such determined idealism, it seemed impossible that his vibrant life could be extinguished after everything they had survived. "I can't lose him," she said softly. "Not now. Not after coming so far." Kane's gaze held hers steady and reassuring. "You won't. We'll get him through this." The simple promise carried more weight than elaborate reassurances would have. Kane understood what Daniel meant to her and what she was prepared to do to save him. They rode in silence after that, conserving energy and focus for the difficult trail. The snow intensified, reducing visibility to mere yards ahead. Two Hawks led with confidence despite the conditions, his wilderness skills proving invaluable as daylight faded. By the time they reached the trapper's cabin, darkness had fallen completely. The structure was crude but solid, log walls chinked with moss, a stone chimney, and a roof that appeared to be holding despite years of neglect. Kane dismounted first, helping Daniel down with gentle care. The injured man had regained consciousness during the journey, but was delirious with fever, muttering incoherently as they carried him inside. The cabin's interior was musty but dry, furnished with a crude bunk, a wooden table, and a stone fireplace. Two Hawks immediately set about building a fire, while Kane and Maggie made Daniel as comfortable as possible on the bunk. "Water," Maggie said, rummaging through her saddlebags for medical supplies. "I need to clean his wounds before infection spreads further." Kane nodded, gathering snow in a pot to melt over the nascent fire. Two hawks volunteered to tend the horses and keep watch, slipping out into the darkness with silent efficiency. As warmth gradually filled the small space, Maggie began the difficult task of assessing Daniel's injuries. She cut away his filthy shirt, revealing a torso mottled with bruises in various stages of healing. His left arm was indeed broken, a compound fracture that had been left untreated, the bone knitting improperly. "I'll need to re-break and set it," she said, clinical detachment, keeping her emotions in check. "Hold him steady." Kane positioned himself at the head of the bunk, strong hands gripping Daniel's shoulders. "Do what you need to do." Maggie took a deep breath, steeling herself for what must be done. With swift, precise movements learned in field hospitals, she manipulated the damaged limb until the bone snapped free of its improper union. Daniel's scream echoed through the cabin, his body arching in agony despite Kane's restraining grip. "Almost done," Maggie soothed, aligning the bone fragments by feel alone. "Just a little more." Working quickly, she splinted the arm, using strips of wood from a broken barrel and bandages from her medical supplies. Throughout the procedure, Kane maintained his steady hold, murmuring reassurances in a voice that seemed to penetrate Daniel's delirium. When the worst was over, Maggie turned her attention to his other injuries, cleaning lacerated skin, binding cracked ribs, applying salve to burns that could only have been made by cigars pressed deliberately into flesh. Each mark told a story of Coleman's cruelty, of Daniel's stubborn resistance. "He never broke," Kane observed quietly, watching Maggie work. "Never told Coleman what he wanted to know, despite everything they did to him." "He always was stubborn," Maggie replied, her voice thick with emotion she could no longer suppress. "Even as a child. Once Daniel decided something was right, nothing could move him." "Sounds like someone else I know," Kane said, a hint of warmth breaking through his grim expression. Their eyes met over Daniel's still form, the shared experience of the day of the past week creating a bond that required no words. They had each risked everything for the sake of someone they loved, had faced death unflinching in pursuit of what they believed right. The moment was interrupted by Daniel's sudden cough, a wet, racking sound that suggested fluid in the lungs. Maggie immediately raised his head, helping him clear the congestion. "Pneumonia," she said grimly, "starting from exposure and weakness." Kane's expression darkened. "How long can he last?" "Without proper medical attention." Maggie shook her head. "Days at most. We need to get him to Fort Laramie as soon as possible." Daniel's eyes opened, momentarily lucid despite the fever. "Maggie," he whispered, "is it really you?" "I'm here," she assured him, taking his uninjured hand. "Rest now. We're taking you to safety." "The map," Daniel insisted, struggling to focus. "Did Coleman get it?" "No," Kane answered, moving into Daniel's line of sight. "He's dead. Your sister saw to that." A faint smile touched Daniel's cracked lips. "Good." His gaze shifted between them. "You found each other, just like Sarah said you would." Maggie frowned in confusion. "Sarah, what are you talking about, Daniel?" "Kane's sister-in-law." Daniel murmured, his voice fading as delirium reclaimed him. "She wrote to me before she died, said if anything happened to her, to find you, that you'd help Kane and Ellie." Kane stared at Daniel in disbelief. "That's impossible. Sarah died before Daniel ever came west." "Maybe not," Maggie said slowly, pieces falling into place. "Remember what Ellie said about seeing me in her dreams? What if Sarah somehow knew?" "No," Kane interrupted firmly. "I don't believe in spirits or premonitions. There's a rational explanation." Before Maggie could respond, Two Hawks slipped back into the cabin, his expression grave. "Riders coming," he reported. "Many horses, from direction of mining camp." Kane was instantly alert. "Coleman's reinforcements, how far?" "1 hour, maybe less." Two Hawks moved to the window, peering into the darkness. "Heavy snow slows them, but they have tracker." "Good one." "We need to move," Kane decided. "Get Daniel to Fort Laramie ahead of them." Maggie shook her head. "He's too weak. Moving him now could kill him." "Staying will definitely kill all of us," Kane countered. "Coleman's men won't take prisoners after what happened at the camp." The dilemma hung between them, the immediate threat versus Daniel's fragile condition. Maggie knew Kane was right. Logically, their only chance was to flee. But her heart refused to accept the risk to her brother's life after coming so close to saving him. "Go," Daniel whispered, startling them both. He had regained consciousness enough to follow their conversation. "Take Maggie and run. I'll slow them down." Not happening, Kane said firmly. Two Hawks had been listening silently. Now he spoke, his voice calm despite the urgency of their situation. I stay with injured one. Hide him. You lead hunters away, then circle back. It's too dangerous, Maggie protested. They'll kill you both if they find you. The Sioux warrior smiled thinly. They must find us first. I know ways to hide that white men never learn. He gestured toward the window. Many caves in these hills. Good places to heal, to hide. Kane considered the proposal with military precision. It could work. We lead them south away from Fort Laramie. Make them think we're all together. Once they're committed to the false trail, we circle back. And if they catch up to you before you can circle back, Daniel asked weakly. They won't, Kane said with quiet confidence. I know these hills better than any tracker Coleman could hire. The plan was far from perfect, but with pursuers closing in and Daniel too weak to travel, options were limited. Maggie looked at her brother, torn between staying with him and the knowledge that her presence would only increase the danger to both him and Two Hawks. I'll come back for you, she promised, clasping Daniel's hand. Just hold on a little longer. Daniel managed a weak smile. Always do. His eyes shifted to Kane. Take care of her. With my life, Kane replied, the simple vow carrying more weight than elaborate promises. They worked quickly, gathering essential supplies and preparing to depart. Two Hawks outlined his plan to move Daniel to a nearby cave system once the pursuers had passed, where native remedies might help stabilize his condition until they could return. As Kane checked the horses, Maggie had a final moment alone with her brother. She knelt beside the bunk, smoothing damp hair from his forehead. I've spent years looking for you, she said softly. I'm not giving up now. Daniel's good hand caught hers. I knew you'd come, he whispered. Never doubted it. His eyes held hers, suddenly clear despite the fever. He's a good man, Maggie. Better than most who wore blue or gray. She didn't pretend to misunderstand. I know. Then don't waste time. Daniel's grip tightened briefly. Life's too short for hesitation. War taught us that much. Before Maggie could respond, Kane appeared in the doorway. Time to go, he said quietly. Horses are ready. With a final kiss to her brother's forehead, Maggie rose. Two Hawks had already begun preparations to move Daniel, gathering furs and medicines from his saddlebags. The Sioux warrior nodded solemnly as they departed, a silent promise to guard his charge with his life. Outside, the snow had finally stopped, leaving a pristine white blanket across the landscape. Stars glittered overhead in a sky cleared by the passing storm, their cold light sufficient to illuminate the trail ahead. Kane helped Maggie mount, then swung into his own saddle. We ride south, he said, orientation clear despite the darkness. Make an obvious trail until we're sure they're following, then split off eastward through the creek bed. Water will hide our tracks. How long before we can circle back? Maggie asked, anxiety for Daniel, already gnawing at her resolve. Day, maybe two, Kane admitted. Need to make sure they're committed to the false trail. His expression softened at her visible distress. Two Hawks is the best scout I've ever known. He'll keep Daniel safe. With a final glance at the cabin where lamplight still glowed faintly through the single window, they urged their horses forward into the night. The trail south led through a narrow valley before ascending a ridge that would expose them briefly to any pursuers, a calculated risk to ensure they were spotted and followed. What about Ellie? Maggie asked as they rode. Will she be safe at the Sioux camp while we're gone? Gray Bear will protect her as one of his own, Kane assured her. The camp is well hidden and Coleman's men won't risk venturing that deep into Sioux territory. His voice held absolute certainty, though Maggie detected an undercurrent of concern beneath his confidence. They rode in silence after that, conserving energy and staying alert for signs of pursuit. The miles passed beneath their horses' hooves, each carrying them further from Daniel, but also drawing the danger away from him, a necessary sacrifice that nonetheless felt like physical pain to Maggie. Near dawn, they reached the ridge Kane had mentioned. He halted at the tree line, studying the back trail with the practiced eye of a scout. We cross at first light, he decided. Make sure they see us. And if they're closer than we think? Maggie asked. If they catch up before we can disappear again? Kane's hand moved to his rifle, checking it with automatic precision. Then we fight. His eyes met hers in the gray light of approaching dawn. But it won't come to that. I promised Daniel I'd protect you, and I mean to keep that promise. The simple declaration carried layers of meaning that Maggie didn't dare examine too closely, not now with danger at their heels and her brother's life hanging in the balance. Yet she couldn't deny the warmth that spread through her chest, a feeling that had nothing to do with their desperate circumstances and everything to do with the man beside her. "We should rest while we can," Kane suggested, dismounting. "Horses need it too." They made a cold camp beneath the sheltering branches of a massive pine, sharing jerky and hardtack from their saddlebags. Sitting close for warmth, their shoulders touching, Maggie found herself studying Kane's profile in the growing light, the strong line of his jaw, the tiny scar that bisected his eyebrow, the gray eyes that had seen too much death yet retained their humanity. "What?" he asked, noticing her scrutiny. "Just thinking," Maggie replied, "about how strange life is. A week ago we were strangers, enemies even by the standards of the war." "The war ended 11 years ago," Kane reminded her. "Did it really?" Well, Maggie's gaze drifted to the eastern horizon where the first hint of sunrise painted the sky. "Sometimes I think it just changed forms, became something less visible but no less destructive." Kane considered this, absently running a thumb along the scar on his eyebrow. "Maybe you're right. Coleman was fighting his own private war union against Confederate civilization against wilderness." His expression hardened. "But some wars need fighting. Some enemies need stopping, no matter the kind." "And after," Maggie asked, "when Coleman's gone and Daniel's safe, what then?" The question hung between them, laden with implications neither was ready to voice aloud. Kane's gaze held hers, something vulnerable, briefly visible beneath his stoic exterior. Before he could answer, the distant sound of hoofbeats reached them, faint but unmistakable in the still morning air. Their pursuers had arrived sooner than expected. Kane was on his feet instantly, helping Maggie up. "Change of plans," he said, urgency replacing introspection. "We cross now while they're still in the valley. Make sure they see us, then ride hard for the creek." As they mounted and prepared to break cover, Maggie found herself strangely calm despite the danger. Perhaps it was the clarity that came from having no choices left, or perhaps it was the quiet confidence Kane projected, the certainty that they would survive, would return for Daniel, and Ellie would find a way forward despite everything arrayed against them. The sun crested the horizon as they emerged onto the open ridge, two silhouettes clearly visible against the dawn sky, a deliberate revelation designed to draw their hunters away from Daniel and two hawks. Below in the valley they had traversed during the night, dark figures on horseback spotted them immediately, shouts carrying faintly on the cold morning air. "They've seen us," Kane confirmed. "Now we ride. Don't stop for anything." They spurred their horses forward, racing along the exposed ridgeline, before plunging down the eastern slope toward the promised sanctuary of the creek bed. Behind them, their pursuers altered course, committed now to the chase that would lead them steadily away from the true prize they sought. As they rode, Maggie found herself thinking of Ellie's words about dreams and visions, of Daniel's delirious mention of Sarah's letter. Perhaps there were forces at work beyond rational explanation, guiding their paths toward each other across time and circumstance. Or perhaps it was simply the human capacity for connection, for finding meaning and purpose, even in the midst of pain and danger. Whatever the explanation, Maggie knew with sudden clarity that her life had irrevocably changed the moment she stepped off that train in Deadwood Creek. The future remained uncertain, fraught with immediate dangers and long-term challenges. But for the first time since William's death, she found herself looking forward rather than back, imagining possibilities rather than mourning losses. Beside her, Kane rode with the focused determination of a man who had found something worth fighting for beyond mere survival. Whatever came next, whether triumph or tragedy, they would face it together, bound by choices made freely, despite the circumstances that had forced them. And for now, that was enough. Fort Laramie rose from the plains like a vision of civilization amid wilderness, whitewashed walls gleaming in the winter sunlight, the American flag snapping in the brisk wind above the parade ground. After 3 days of hard riding, sleeping rough, and constant vigilance, the sight brought tears to Maggie's eyes. "We made it," she murmured, reining her exhausted horse to a walk as they approached the gates. Kane rode beside her, his face weathered from exposure, dark stubble covering his jaw. He looked as tired as Maggie felt, but his eyes remained alert, scanning their surroundings with habitual caution. "Not home yet," he reminded her, "but closer at least." They had successfully led Coleman's men on a false trail south for nearly a day, traveling openly until certain of pursuit before doubling back through rough country where tracking was nearly impossible. The maneuver had worked. The bounty hunters continued south while Kane and Maggie circled northeast toward Fort Laramie, guided by the stars and Kane's unerring sense of direction. Now as they approached the fort's gates, the sentry called out the standard challenge. Kane answered clearly, identifying himself and Maggie, stating their business. "We need to see Colonel Randall immediately," he concluded. "Federal matter involving Marshal Harker and the Coleman mining operation." The name-dropping worked. Within minutes, they were escorted through the gate, their horses taken by a young private with instructions to provide the animals with extra care. A lieutenant led them directly to the commandant's office, where Colonel Randall, a graying veteran with intelligent eyes and a no-nonsense demeanor, received them without delay. "Marshal Harker sent a rider ahead," the colonel explained after brief introductions. "Arrived yesterday with preliminary reports of the situation at Elkhorn Ridge." He studied Kane with particular interest, though he failed to mention one of his associates was a former Confederate officer. Kane stiffened slightly. "The war's been over a long time, Colonel." "Indeed," Randall agreed, though his tone suggested personal reservations. To Maggie, he continued more warmly. "The marshal spoke highly of your courage, Miss Callahan. Said you were instrumental in exposing Coleman's operation." "Thank you, sir, but we have more urgent matters," Maggie replied, refusing to be sidetracked by pleasantries. "My brother Daniel is injured and hiding in the hills with a Sioux scout. We need a rescue party immediately." Colonel Randall's expression tightened. "I'm afraid that's complicated, Miss Callahan. The situation with the Sioux is delicate, especially after Little Bighorn. I can't simply send troops into their territory." "Daniel isn't in Sioux territory," Kane interjected. "He's at Miller's Creek, old trapper's cabin about 30 miles northwest, territory under Bush federal jurisdiction." His gaze hardened, "and he won't survive much longer without medical attention." The colonel considered this, clearly weighing military protocol against humanitarian concerns. "I'll dispatch a detachment with a field surgeon," he decided finally. "Lieutenant Wells can lead them. He knows the area." "I'm going with them," Maggie stated. It wasn't a request. "As am I," Kane added, his tone equally resolute. Colonel Randall raised an eyebrow at their determination but nodded agreement. "Very well. The detachment leaves in 1 hour." He rose, signaling the end of the meeting. "In the meantime, I suggest you both get some food and rest. You look dead on your feet." They were escorted to the officers' mess, where hot food and coffee revived their exhausted bodies. Maggie ate mechanically, her thoughts fixed on Daniel and the uncertain condition in which they had left him. Across the table, Kane was similarly preoccupied, his gaze frequently drifting to the window as if gauging the passing time. "We should have stayed with him," or Maggie said quietly. Kane shook his head. "If we had, Coleman's men would have found all of us. This way, at least Daniel had a chance." "And now, what if the soldiers is too late?" Kane reached across the table, covering her hand with his own, a rare public display that spoke volumes about his concern for her. "Two Hawks is skilled in healing arts. He'll keep Daniel alive until we return." Maggie wanted desperately to believe him, but fear had taken root in her heart. She had come so far, risked so much to find her brother. The thought of losing him now when freedom and safety were finally within reach was unbearable. "And Ellie," she asked, changing the subject to distract herself from darker thoughts. "How soon can we return for her?" Kane's expression softened at mention of his daughter. "Once Daniel is safe, I'll go back for her. Gray Bear will protect her until then." "You mean we'll go back for her," Maggie corrected firmly. Something flickered in Kane's eyes, surprise followed by a warmth that transcended mere gratitude. "Yes," he agreed quietly, "we will." The hour passed quickly. Lieutenant Wells, a young, earnest officer with a frontier upbringing, evident in his confident manner, assembled a detachment of 12 men, including a seasoned Army surgeon. Maggie and Kane were provided with fresh horses, their own mounts, too exhausted for the return journey. As they prepared to depart, Colonel Randall approached with a folded paper sealed with the fort's official stamp. "Marshal Harker requested this," he explained, handing the document to Kane. "Official recognition of your assistance in the Coleman matter. It's not a pardon for past actions, but it acknowledges your service to federal authorities." His expression remained neutral, but a hint of respect had entered his voice. "According to the marshal, you fought with distinction." Kane accepted the paper with a nod, tucking it inside his coat without reading it. Such official recognition meant little to him personally, but Maggie understood its potential value. A former Confederate officer would find many doors closed without such documentation of his loyalty to the reunified nation. The journey back to Miller's Creek was made in record time, the soldiers pushing their mounts hard at Lieutenant Wells's insistence. They reached the trapper's cabin shortly after dawn on the second day, approaching cautiously in case Coleman's men had doubled back. The cabin stood empty, cold ashes in the fireplace, indicating it had been abandoned for at least a day. No sign of struggle suggested a violent departure, but Daniel and Two Hawks were nowhere to be found. They've moved to the caves, Kane determined, examining subtle marks only a trained scout would notice. As planned, Lieutenant Wells deferred to Kane's wilderness expertise, following as he led them to a rocky outcropping half a mile from the cabin. What appeared to be solid stone from a distance revealed itself as the entrance to a cave system upon closer inspection. Two Hawks, Kane called softly, his voice carrying into the darkness beyond. For a heart-stopping moment, there was no response. Then a voice replied, not Two Hawks, but Daniel himself, weak but unmistakable. Kane, that's you. Maggie pushed past the soldiers, rushing into the cave with reckless disregard for protocol. In the dimness, illuminated only by a small fire, she found her brother propped against the wall, wrapped in furs. His condition appeared marginally improved. Some color had returned to his face and his eyes were clear, despite the evident pain in their depths. Daniel, she breathed, dropping to her knees beside him. We came back, just like I promised. His good hand clasped hers with surprising strength. Never doubted it. His gaze moved past her to the soldiers entering the cave. Brought the cavalry, I see. Federal detachment from Fort Laramie, Kane explained, crouching on Daniel's other side, including a surgeon. As if summoned by the mention, the army doctor shouldered his way forward, medical bag in hand. Let me examine him, he ordered, professional efficiency overriding courtesy. Maggie reluctantly moved aside, allowing the surgeon space to work. Two Hawks materialized from deeper within the cave system, acknowledging Kane with a silent nod before providing the doctor with information about treatments. He had administered herbal poultices for infection, willow bark tea for fever splints, reinforced with pine resin for the broken bones. The surgeon listened with surprising respect, incorporating the Sioux healer's observations into his own assessment. After a thorough examination, he delivered his verdict. He's stronger than he looks, he admitted. Fever's down, infection contained. The arm's been properly set. He glanced at Two Hawks with grudging professional respect. Native medicine has its merits, apparently. Will he recover? Maggie asked the only question that mattered to her. With proper care, yes. The surgeon began repacking his bag. But he needs to be moved to the fort immediately. The pneumonia is my primary concern now. Lieutenant Wells took charge, organizing his men to construct a travois for transporting Daniel. Two Hawks offered additional furs and herbs for the journey, which the surgeon accepted without the disdain many white doctors would have shown. As preparations continued, Maggie found a moment alone with her brother. I thought I'd lost you. She confessed the fear she'd been suppressing, finally surfacing. Daniel's smile was tired but genuine. Takes more than Coleman to kill a Callahan. He shifted slightly, wincing at the movement. Did you get him, Coleman? He's dead, Maggie confirmed. Won't trouble anyone again. Good. Daniel's expression darkened briefly before clearing. What about the gold, the map? Safe, Kane answered, joining their conversation. Marshal Harker has Coleman's, half the forgery Maggie created. The real map remains divided between us. He glanced at Two Hawks, who was assisting the soldiers. As agreed with Gray Bear, the location remains secret until the treaty situation is resolved. Daniel nodded approval. As it should be. His gaze moved between them, a knowing look entering his eyes. So, you two. Maggie felt heat rise in her cheeks. Don't start, Daniel. Start what? Her brother's innocent expression didn't fool her for a second. Just noting that Sarah was right after all. Kane frowned in. You mentioned that before. What exactly did Sarah write to you? Daniel's expression turned thoughtful. Letter came about 3 years ago, just before the train attack that killed her. Said she'd been having dreams about a woman who looked like her, dark hair, blue eyes. Said this woman would come west looking for someone, and when she found you, instead it would change everything. He shrugged his good shoulder. Seemed like nonsense at the time. Sarah was always fanciful. But you remembered, Maggie pressed. When you needed help, you suggested Kane find me. Seemed worth trying. Daniel's gaze moved between them again, assessment clear in his eyes. Looks like it worked out better than I expected. Before either could respond, Lieutenant Wells announced they were ready to depart. The journey back to Fort Laramie would be slow with Daniel on the travois, but the improved weather promised relatively safe travel. Two Hawks declined the lieutenant's invitation to accompany them to the fort. My place is with my people, he explained in his precise English. Gray Bear waits for news. Kane clasped the warrior's arm in farewell. Tell Gray Bear we'll return for Ellie as soon as Daniel is stable, and thank him for his protection. Two Hawks nodded. To Maggie he added, the child speaks of you often, says you promised to return. I intend to keep that promise, Maggie assured him. With final farewells exchanged, the detachment began the journey back to Fort Laramie. Maggie rode beside the travois, monitoring Daniel's condition and occasionally adjusting the furs that sheltered him from the winter air. Kane rode scout position alongside Lieutenant Wells, his frontier skills proving invaluable, despite the lieutenant's initial reservations about deferring to a former Confederate. They reached Fort Laramie without incident 3 days later. Daniel was immediately transferred to the post hospital, where the chief medical officer confirmed the field surgeon's assessment. With proper care, he would make a full recovery, though the arm might never regain its full strength. For the first time in weeks, Maggie allowed herself to truly relax, the constant tension of danger and pursuit finally releasing its grip on her shoulders. She found herself standing alone on the fort's eastern wall that evening, watching the sunset paint the plains in shades of gold and crimson. Kane found her there, joining her in silent contemplation of the vista. The air between them held an expectancy, questions unasked and possibilities unexplored during their desperate flight now demanding acknowledgement. Daniel's resting comfortably, he reported finally. Doctor says the worst is past. Thank God, Maggie murmured. I've never been so frightened as when we had to leave him behind. You did what was necessary, Kane reminded her. Saved his life by drawing the danger away. Maggie turned to face him, studying the face that had become so familiar in such a short time. The setting sun cast his features in bronze relief, emphasizing the strength of his jaw, the character etched into the lines around his eyes. What happens now, Jonah? She asked quietly, using his given name for the first time. The simple question encompassed everything: their uncertain future, the connection that had formed between them, the practical realities of their disrupted lives. Kane's gaze held hers steadily. I return to the Sioux camp tomorrow to bring Ellie back. Colonel Randall has approved the journey with a military escort as far as the treaty line. And then, Maggie pressed, then we rebuild. His hand moved to cover hers where it rested on the wall. My cabin's gone, but the land remains. Spring will come. New beginnings are possible. The careful phrasing revealed his uncertainty, not about his own feelings, but about hers. He was offering a future without explicitly asking for commitment, giving her space to choose her own path now that the crisis had passed. I came west looking for Daniel, Maggie said slowly. Found more than I expected. Is that good or bad? Kane asked, his voice carefully neutral, despite the vulnerability in his eyes. Instead of answering directly, Maggie asked, will you take me with you tomorrow? To get Ellie? Surprise flickered across his face, followed by something deeper. You want to come? I promised her I'd return, Maggie said simply. I don't break promises to children. Understanding dawned in Kane's expression. This wasn't just about Ellie. It was Maggie's answer to his unspoken question, her way of saying she chose a future that included both him and his daughter. Yes, he said finally, I'd like that very much. The moment stretched between them, filled with unspoken emotions, neither was quite ready to voice aloud. Finally, Kane cleared his throat. Colonel Randall offered me a position, he said. Scout for the fort, liaising with the Sioux. Said my connections with both sides could prove valuable. Are you considering it? Maggie asked, surprised. Might be practical, Kane admitted. Steady pay while rebuilding. Access to supplies protection. He hesitated. But it would mean living close to the fort. Military environment. Might not be what he stopped himself. Might not be ideal. Maggie heard the unfinished thought, might not be what you want. He was still giving her space to choose, refusing to assume her preferences. I think it sounds sensible, she said carefully, at least until other options present themselves. She turned back to the sunset, gathering courage for what needed to be said. Daniel will need time to recover completely. Having access to the fort's medical facilities would benefit him. You're staying with him then? Kane asked, something tight entering his voice. Maggie nodded. He's my family. My responsibility. She turned to face Kane again, decision crystallizing within her. But family isn't just blood, is it? It's choice, commitment, facing danger together and coming out stronger. The implication hung between them, too significant to be misunderstood. Kane's hand tightened on hers, hope warming his usually guarded expression. Ellie needs a mother, he said quietly. Has since Mary died. I've done my best, but there are things a girl needs that a father can't provide alone. Is that a proposal, Captain Kane? Maggie asked, surprising herself with the directness of the question. Kane's smile was unexpected, transforming his serious face into something altogether warmer, more vulnerable. Not a very good one, he admitted. Mary deserved better, and so do you. He took both her hands in his. But yes, Margaret Callahan, when you're ready, when you're certain, I'm asking you to consider becoming my wife. Ellie's mother. Partner in whatever future we build from the ashes Coleman left behind. The honesty of the declaration, its lack of flowery sentiment or false promises, touched Maggie more deeply than elaborate romance would have. This was a man who had seen the worst of humanity, who understood hardship and loss, yet still believed in possibility. I'll consider it, she said softly, but not because Ellie needs a mother, though I've grown to love her dearly. Her eyes held his unflinching. I'll consider it because, in the midst of danger and uncertainty, I found something I thought I'd lost forever after William died, someone who sees me completely, strength and weakness alike, and stands beside me regardless. The simple truth affected Kane visibly, a soldier unashamed of the emotion that briefly overwhelmed his composure. His hand rose to touch her cheek, with calloused fingers gentle despite their strength. When did you know? He asked, voice rough with feeling. When you gave me your rifle at the cabin. Maggie answered without hesitation. You trusted my judgment, my ability to protect myself and Ellie if necessary. No man had ever done that before, not William, not my father. They all sought to shelter me, never understanding that true respect means allowing someone to share both the danger and the triumph. Kane nodded, understanding perfectly. For me, it was watching you set Daniel's arm in that trapper's cabin. Such competence, such compassion, even after everything you'd been through. I thought, this is a woman who could face anything and emerge stronger. The confession hung between them, honest and unadorned. No passionate declarations or promises of eternal devotion, those belonged to younger souls, untested by life's harshest realities. Instead, they offered each other something rare, clear-eyed recognition of worth, respect, born from shared struggle, possibility rooted in pragmatic hope. As darkness fell across the plains, they returned to the fort's interior, walking side by side without touching, yet more intimately connected than many couples who had spent decades together. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, the journey to retrieve Ellie Daniels' continued recovery, decisions about their collective future. But for now, this understanding was enough, a foundation upon which something permanent could be built if they chose. 2 weeks later, a small group gathered in Fort Laramie's chapel. Daniel Callahan sat in the front row, his arms still splinted, but his face restored to healthy color, watching with undisguised approval as his sister stood beside Jonah Kane before the post-chaplain. Ellie, beaming with joy in a new dress sewn by the commander's wife, held a small bouquet of dried winter flowers, her role as attendant taken with solemn responsibility. The ceremony was brief, the words traditional, yet resonant with personal meaning for the couple who had faced death together before contemplating a shared life. When Kane placed a simple gold band on Maggie's finger, purchased from a sutler, with part of the reward money for Coleman's capture, his hand was steady despite the emotion evident in his eyes. I take you, Margaret Callahan, to be my lawfully wedded wife. He vowed, his voice carrying clearly through the small chapel. To stand beside in struggle and in peace, to honor your strength as well as your gentleness, to build a home and a future worthy of your courage. Maggie's answering vow, spoken with similar clarity, acknowledged the unusual foundation of their relationship, forged in danger, tested by adversity, chosen with clear-eyed awareness rather than romantic illusion. I take you, Jonah Kane, to be my lawfully wedded husband, she declared, to face life's battles at your side, to cherish the man who sees me truly, to create a family bound by choice as well as circumstance. When the chaplain pronounced them husband and wife, their kiss was brief but tender, a promise more meaningful for its restraint. Ellie's delighted clapping broke the solemn moment, drawing laughter from the small assembly of witnesses. The celebration afterward was modest, a dinner in the officers' mess toasts offered by Daniel and Colonel Randall, who had come to respect Kane's frontier skills during the weeks following their return from Sioux territory. Two Hawks attended as Kane's guest, his presence a bridge between worlds that would become increasingly important in Kane's new role as liaison between fort and tribe. As the evening progressed, Maggie found a quiet moment with her brother, who watched the proceedings with contentment despite his ongoing recovery. "Happy?" Daniel asked simply. "Yes," Maggie answered without hesitation. "Not as I expected to be when I headed west, but genuinely happy nonetheless." Daniel nodded approval. "He's a good man, different from William, but perhaps more suited to who you've become." His gaze drifted to where Kane sat with Ellie on his knee, the child chattering excitedly about their plans for a new cabin come spring. "And Ellie adores you." "Well, the feeling is mutual," Maggie admitted. "She's remarkable, so resilient despite everything she's been through." "Like someone else I know," Daniel observed wryly. Maggie changed the subject. "What about you?" Colonel Randall mentioned the territorial governor is interested in your testimony about Coleman's operations. Could lead to a position with the land office overseeing treaty compliance. "Perhaps," Daniel acknowledged, "though part of me wants to head further west. California, maybe. Start completely fresh." Concern tightened Maggie's chest. "You'd leave after everything it took to find you." Daniel's expression softened. "Not immediately, and not forever." He glanced meaningfully toward Kane and Ellie. "You have a new family now, Maggie. Don't need your broken-down brother hanging around." "Don't be ridiculous," Maggie chided. "You're as much a part of this family as any of us." Her voice gentled. "Besides, Ellie would be devastated if her Uncle Daniel disappeared just when she's getting to know him." Daniel smiled at the title. "Uncle Daniel? I like that." His expression turned thoughtful. "Maybe I'll stay through summer at least. Help build the new cabin. See how this liaison position of Kane's develops." "Good," Maggie said firmly. "That's settled then." Later, as the celebration wound down, Kane found Maggie standing alone at the window, watching the first snowflakes of a new storm dancing in the lamplight. "Having second thoughts?" he asked quietly, coming to stand beside her. Maggie shook her head. "Just contemplating how much can change in a few short weeks. When I boarded that train east, I never imagined." She gestured to encompass everything: their marriage, Ellie, the fort, the future stretching before them. Kane's arms slipped around her waist, a gesture still new enough to send warmth coursing through her. "Regrets? None," Maggie answered truthfully. "Though I do wonder sometimes if Sarah somehow knew, if her dreams really did show her what would happen." Kane, ever the pragmatist, shrugged. "Does it matter whether fate, coincidence, or something stranger brought us together? We're here now. The rest is what we make of it." Maggie leaned into his solid presence, finding comfort in his matter-of-fact approach to even the most mysterious circumstances. "And what will we make of it, Captain Kane?" His answer carried the quiet certainty that had drawn her to him from the beginning, the steadfastness that balanced her own determination, creating something stronger than either possessed alone. "A home," he said simply, "a family, a life worth the struggles that brought us here." His arm tightened fractionally. "Starting tomorrow." As they rejoined the gathering, Ellie rushed to meet them, her small face alight with joy and possibility. She took Maggie's hand without hesitation, accepting her new role as daughter with the same resilience that had helped her survive loss and danger. "Are we going home soon?" she asked, looking between her father and her new mother. Kane glanced at Maggie, sharing a moment of perfect understanding before answering. "We're already home, darling. Wherever we're together, that's home now." As spring thawed the frozen plains months later, a cabin rose on Kane's land, larger than the original, built with help from Daniel Two Hawks and soldiers from the fort who had come to respect the former Confederate captain. Nearby, a small school took shape as well, where Maggie would teach both settler and Sioux children, building bridges between cultures that politics had failed to reconcile. The gold deposit remained their secret, a trust held for the Sioux Nation until treaties could be properly honored. In its place, they found different treasures: Ellie's laughter echoing across the creek, Daniel's strength returning with each passing day, the gradual acceptance of the community that had once viewed them with suspicion. On a warm evening in May, Maggie stood in the doorway of their new home, Watching Kane and Daniel set the final ridge beam in place, Ellie danced around them offering supervision that made both men laugh despite their exhaustion. "They've come a long way," observed Martha Simmons, who had journeyed from Dry Creek to witness the cabin raising. The widow had become a regular visitor, her frontier wisdom and practical nature providing valuable friendship to Maggie in this new life. "We all have," Maggie agreed. Her hand rested briefly on her abdomen, where the first signs of new life had recently made themselves known, a secret she would share with Kane that evening once the day's work was done. Martha followed the gesture with knowing eyes. "Life goes on," she said simply. "Despite everything, it finds a way." As twilight settled over the plains, the small family gathered on the porch of their unfinished home. Daniel produced a fiddle salvaged from the ruins of Dry Creek's church, playing a bittersweet melody that spoke of both loss and renewal. Kane's arm encircled Maggie's shoulders, drawing her close as they watched the first stars appear in the deepening blue above. Ellie leaned against them, secure in the knowledge that this family, assembled through chance choice and perhaps something more mysterious, would not be broken again. "I never expected this," Maggie admitted softly for Kane's ears alone. "When I came west, I thought finding Daniel was the end of my journey." Kane's reply held the quiet wisdom that had become the foundation of their shared life. "Most journeys worth taking lead to places we never imagined," he said. "The trick is recognizing home when you find it." As night fell completely over the Dakota plains, the lights of their cabin stood as a beacon against the darkness, a testament to resilience, to second chances to the family, forged not by blood alone, but by the stronger bonds of choice and commitment. The winter bride had found her spring at last.